Well, I guess I missed the ride sharing program with,
Yeah.
with Dave.
Yeah.
Right.
Before I got here. Okay.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started on day 2 of the June Slate Creek Steering Committee meeting. We'll go ahead and start with a quick roll call to see who's in the room. Kayla McMonagle with Civic Canopy. Go
Dave
quick.
Lawrence, Steamboat City Council.
Lou Totoro. James. Yeah, Harrington, Round County.
Angelica Salinas, Rat County Commissioner.
Mason, City of Steamboat.
Gail Gary, Steamboat Springs City Council.
Shannon Woodlander, YHA. Emily Councilman, YBHA.
Great. And then we're gonna go ahead and kind of adjust where we were on the agenda yesterday, knowing we switched things around a little bit. So the way that I intend to go today is we're gonna return to the conversation first about roles. We're gonna start off with a conversation of how each of you approach this activity, because I think that some of the stories behind this will be as informative as the sticky notes themselves. And then we can see what we need to align here. My big objective coming out of this is to be able to leave with clarity about who's in your project manager role, what the major responsibilities for them versus SCSC are, what they can do independently to move this work forward, what needs to come to you all, and then have a high level idea of these different pieces, where collaboration happens, where independent action happens, so that PM can finalize these roles for you in a way that's got clarity to it. Then, and this is, what do we need to know about roles to be able to make final decisions on the roadmap? Then we'll go ahead and talk through communications and community engagement before returning to the roadmap. Give me a check-in of Clark sent out some example documents. Thumbs up, you got to see those. I skimmed what documents?
I saw them, but didn't read them.
Okay. Okay, deal. Okay, that's helpful for just knowing. So I think he's gonna pull in some of those to think through a revised version of the roadmap. And talk through those a bit. And then we're gonna pull everything together and finish up with an evaluation. There's a question here about whether or not we go back to roadmap first or go to comms and community engagement. Is there any strong preference that says, I want to return to roadmap before we talk about comms and community engagement?
I'm happy with either. We can get to both.
Sounds good. Okay. Let's see, I've got a view that says we've got 2 people in the waiting room.
Oh.
Will you grab them? Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I should be able to. All right. So let's go ahead and talk from each organizational perspective, kind of how you approach this, knowing that different people in a given organization might have approached it differently. But I'm going to start off with City of Steamboat. How did you all approach thinking through the roles and responsibilities?
You mean to be closed?
Okay.
I think we were approaching it primarily from city council. We didn't really approach it from staff perspective. So what's the role of city council in this?
Okay. And what generally did you see the role of city council as?
Being consultant.
Yeah, I think the majority of them were consulting.
Okay.
And then responsible for some of the funding stuff too. They got the SDR side.
Would their responsibility increase at all above the role of consulted when it came to the funding piece?
Yeah, probably, yes.
Yeah, because they'd be decision maker.
Exactly. Right. I mean, in terms of probably, I don't know that we put responsible, but I would say that we are probably a responsible party from the funding.
Okay. And I think that's maybe,
Again, kind of backing up, I think as we mentioned, I mean, it was a little. I don't know if anybody else experienced this, right? But we were kind of trying to just think about it, right? From the not only in terms of the activities, but, really, how this washes out, right? I mean, in terms of who, as you got deeper, who is responsible, who's accountable, exactly. And then, consultant,
And a lot of times those are the same, thing responsible council.
although you said one, right?
Only one and accountable, but you can have somebody who's accountable also be responsible. And then you can have multiple people in there. So I'm gonna add in one
Yeah.
here that I just heard around contribute funding that's up here.
Yeah.
And here I heard city may have an R role here.
Yeah, I think certainly from the SDRs, funding, right, as well as to the extent from grants. Funding, et cetera.
Okay. Then my last question to the group I put in the hot seat first is, where did you get stumped in this process? Or where did you have questions? That you weren't sure how to assign roles and responsibilities?
Well, I think we ended up putting a lot on SCSC as well as on kind of the other things. If we have some sort of consultant or we have some sort of project manager or,
I mean, that's
Yeah,
a fault of
whatever it
what
was.
say until the consultant was there, I guess.
a lot from a resource perspective.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so then let's go, I'm gonna go to Route County next. How did you all approach this?
We looked at it primarily from the role of the Board of County Commissioners, the BCC. Mostly we were consulted or informed in those two columns. When we think about staff involvement, we talked about how really Jay would be the only staff member in its current setup, like the way the roadmap is currently set up, that really needs to be involved. And his role, is covered under the SCSC since he's part of this committee. So we didn't put any specific county staff stickers, understanding that anywhere there was SCSC, that's where a county staff member would be involved. I think I did put us responsible for a couple things, like big picture things. Like I think the Board of County Commissioners should have a say in like some of these big decision items, and that, they are relaying, the three county commissioners are relaying their thoughts and ideas through me and Jay on this committee. But I do feel like that responsibility is somehow involved. So yeah, I think that's where we landed on things. Again, didn't really get stumped. It was nice to get the SCSC stickers so that we can kind of think through like, where does the role of the BCC end and where does this committee pick that up, and what's the relationship between those two? So I think the commissioners have really expressed that they are supportive of this project, that they want to see it go through, that they want to figure out ways that we can help and get involved and support it in our capacity. But that is really going to be through me and Jay on this committee for the most part.
And then let's go to YVHA.
We focused our efforts mostly on the resource and budget management page. Particularly because we see a lot of our role being there. What would y'all add?
Oh, I was confused about the overlay. That's me personally. But I thought we seem to be in the middle of most everything in terms of responsibility, and that's fine. Then, the question was, what do we do with the SCS? And what role are they actually playing? Are they accountable? Are we accountable? Or are you accountable to the city council? You're accountable to the Board of County Commissioners. So, who's accountable? We thought SCSC was mostly accountable. That this group as a steering committee was accountable. I mean, that's.
Yeah, because I feel like we kept falling back on like it should be all three entities, which would be the SCSCs. That's kind of the consensus, at least that the three of us came to. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's how I felt about it. I feel like we had a little bit of trouble differentiating, or not differentiating, but like identifying where the board plays a role versus a lot of it is staff. So yeah, trying to figure out like what our role is as YBHA board versus YBHA staff members.
Did you have any inklings on what you thought that differentiation was?
between staff and the board. I think we're trying to figure that out
Yeah.
at the present time.
Mhm. Okay. So I want to pick up on this question around who's ultimately accountable. Is it SCSC or are we accountable to individual organizations? How did folks see that?
I think, my feeling is if we want this project to move efficiently, the SESC has to be ultimately accountable. I think everybody knows that ultimately, there's these two bodies over here that are really sort of ultimately accountable, but in terms of the racy and moving this project forward, I see the SESC being the accountable part.
I agree. I think as long as the parent organizations have guardrails or established guardrails in terms of what that freedom of decision making is, this has to be the organization.
I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what would those established guardrails look like?
That I'm not sure. I mean, we've talked about what, we report back as a group to our board, but they only meet once a month. So there's a whole time lag thing. And, here's what we talked about. Here are the decisions we think are going to be coming up at the next meeting. Okay, so what do y'all think about that? And most of the time it's, something or nothing, because nobody's quite sure exactly what the question is.
I think those conversations I'm anticipating they'll become much more robust as we kind of move through this process, right? I mean, and anticipate hopefully being able to use, right, from the city council and integrating those into our meetings. So we have the opportunity for, public comment at that point, right? So I think once we have more tangible, more concrete kind of asks, then I'm hoping that we, get more engagement at that level in addition to all of the other community engagement. But I think as Tom said, ultimately, we're accountable to the rest of council and council's obviously accountable to the community. But I do think for this process, it is all of us, right, that are accountable.
And what is it fair to say that we should be, if we're all in consensus, going to our respective bodies, that it's kind of up to us to sort of sell the direction or to, say this is why we got to this conclusion and not mix it up with too many other comeback opinions.
I think in order for this to be successful, we talked through this a lot in the earlier meetings, that this isn't a negotiation, that this is a collaboration, and that's a really key piece that's different from the first time around. And so us working collaboratively and then coming forward with one unified voice of this is how we made these decisions. We have all three entities supporting this. This is why we, and obviously there's going to be community engagement along the way. Obviously there's going to be conversations along the way with our respective entities, but I think that unified voice is important, and that's why it's important for this group to ultimately be accountable.
I'm gonna say something.
Another conversation that we had around guardrails is that I think the housing authority as the main responsible entity for implementing the roadmap is going to need to have very clearly defined expectations from this group as to what the guardrails are and when can the housing authority move forward with activities within the roadmap, and when do we need to come back for any level of, whether it's consulting, informing, just making sure those expectations are clear from the outset will be really important to the success of this group.
I think that's a great one.
But I mean, just, maybe for some clarification, at our last board meeting, we raised a series of questions that the board needed to comment on, that we felt we needed their comment. Should we have commercial here on this property? There was some mixed feeling across the board, but, pretty much consensus, yeah, okay, there are advantages associated. Should we have market price for housing out there? There's a lot of different opinions. I'm not sure any guardrails were actually established, but at least the questions were raised.
And so that's a piece around the direction of where we're headed with the parcel itself. Can you give some examples of activities that you would see? As PM, I'd like to be able to move this forward or see this in kind of the domain of the project manager to move forward that you'd want to have some independence on.
I think when we get back into technical work, there's so much work that will be happening in between these meetings, unless we're wanting to meet like weekly. And so in order to keep a schedule on track, there's going, I can't sort of name the individual tasks within, but just knowing that managing consultants, means that there's going to be kind of regular internal check-ins to keep things moving. And so, I think I would just want to be really clear as to, are we having, conversation that goes beyond just consulting, but like, kind of like true group decision making within this group related to each milestone, or are there more interim check-ins? I think we need to have that conversation. I can think of specifically things like, procurement and identifying team members, working, once we get into like the scenarios, like doing that, all of the groundwork that, the financial analysis, the engineering and technical analysis on the site that helps build those scenarios. That's the type of work that needs to be moving forward at a steady cadence.
Is there a way to do like a weekly check-in, email information?
I would think
And if,
the electronic communication is probably going to be the fastest. If we need to establish, we've talked about establishing advisory committees. Okay, there'll be a broad idea of who should be on the advisory committees. How do we want to deal with that? Just let Emily pick them and that'd be the end of it, or, there's got to be some conversation. And there are a lot of issues just like that will, need to take place in some form of fashion, maybe outside of a formal meeting setting.
I mean, I think what we're getting at is we're gonna have to have some systems in place which are nimble,
Yes.
or else the 12-month roadmap becomes 36 pretty darn quickly. So, and that's gonna take trust and also understanding, like, here's the time you need your check-in, here's the time when whatever group runs with it. So I think that's critical for us to work through.
So,
just kind of just throwing that out there, right? I mean, if there's an obvious major change in what you anticipate from a finance perspective, I mean, to me, that's something that, right, that's an easy one that says, oh, that's gotta come back to the group, right? In the sense of, or if something comes up, from a technical perspective, and you've got a good sense of that, but I mean, but again, I think it is important for us all to clarify what are those red flags that need to come back to the group.
Yeah, we're doing the scenario planning. We're through the scenarios just are not financially feasible. How do we communicate that so we don't just go down the rabbit hole? This is what we want to do.
Part of the project management structure needs to include a risk assessment and risk management strategy. And part of risk management strategy is communicating early and often in terms of what the risks are and where are we relative to the risks.
So I think coming back to the RACI charts for a second, because this is getting into where is SCSC in the A role versus if YVHA as project manager was authorized to move something forward on their own, we may have them in the A role. And so I want you to take a look and see how we're feeling about, we don't have PM in any of the A roles right now. But I wanted to use this as an example of some of the areas where we are saying SCSC, it needs to come back to this full group. So defining shared goals is here, mediating conflict is here. Developing the budget roadmap for implementation, securing necessary budget approvals, and identifying contractors are all SCSC here. On that one, it's identifying stakeholders and the stakeholder advisory committee. On this one, it's developing meeting cadence and managing schedule and deliverables, detailed scope and budget. Loves activity.
You, Lou.
Is that me?
It must be.
It must. I don't know idea what.
Figured it out.
And then this one is delineating timelines and collecting data are both the SCSC. So, maybe let's start over here. I think we started talking a little bit about the budget one, and Emily, you brought up a piece of like, can the PM identify personnel? And right now, identifying contractors, managing contracts and budgets lines up with that, coming back to the full SCSC as an example. So let's talk through, where do you see in terms of resource and budget management, things that really need to come back to SCSC for full consensus decision-making and accountability versus where SCSC might be consulted and a PM moves things forward?
Well, and just to start the conversation, I want to clarify that when we put those sticky notes up, we're talking about a budget for implementing the roadmap, not for any kind of development.
Yeah.
Property. I'll just put that on the table for clarification.
I think there have to be a lot of decisions that need to be made quickly if we want to bring on a contractor to help us implement or be responsible. Then, you know, I would say that's mostly with the YVHA and the project manager. Is that fair? Are you comfortable with it?
This is an interesting point. So also then YBHA contracts with the contracting.
Well, I mean, well, yeah.
I mean, I think if YBHA is managing schedule and budget, we have the contracts. I agree with that.
And then there's the question of who can select the contractors. Is that okay for YVHA to move forward, or does that need SCSC?
Throw that out there. I think it depends on the contractor. You know, if we wanted a resident inspector, I don't think the SCSC would care. But if we wanted a major contractor, developer, partner, I think you guys need to be involved. That's just my view.
Looking at the contract, and picking the contract,
Say more about that.
just knowing the details that are in the contract.
Okay. What's included in the agreement versus the,
I think the SCSC should consult.
I think we have them accountable now, don't we?
Yeah.
So. I don't know. So I think we're more consulted than accountable, right?
Look at SD, just dip into the past for 27 seconds, but.
Okay.
You just use 10.
It's fine.
You know, we had an RFP went out for a master developer, the Michaels organization, okay, for the original project. In this case, if that were happening today and we wanted to select a master developer, would we come back to the SCSC and for accountability? Or is that just consultation?
It is consultation.
You think it's just consultation?
Yeah, you'd bring back the list of master developers you're thinking about, saying, we've got these three. And we're leaning towards this group, this is why.
Okay.
So help me understand when we go back to the difference between in that role, the consultation versus responsible. And certainly, you know, accountable is one person, but would we be responsible?
Yeah.
And what help us understand in that scenario, what's the difference between, I mean, I understand consulting, but I'm not sure if we were to say we're responsible, what does that mean?
yeah. So the way it's a little bit tricky with something like a decision in this way of like selecting a contractor, but responsible might be in the space of like, you all are helping to draft the RFP as a group, right? Or you all are each actively reviewing all of the applications in a process, right? Versus consulting more at the level of YVHA brings you 3 options, you weigh in on them, YVHA makes a decision.
I approached it as responsible as like the people doing the work.
That's what I was thinking about too, but in this role, right, from an SES, does that mean we'd have maybe responsible leads, or maybe we throw in there when we bring it back for a consent, for, you know, quote unquote vote? I don't know.
Does that feel like something like with major contracts, developer, things like that? You want to be consulted, but you want to be able to take a consensus vote on something like that.
I think I'm throwing that out for discussion.
I think, with major contracts, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, we have a big day, but, we have to be nimble, like Jay said. I think that there's gonna have to be some flexibility, with the way that we are doing this, depending on the contract or depending on the phase. And, I think it would, my personal opinion is, you know, if YBHA says, we're leaning toward, here's the top 3, here's why we want to hire this one. And everyone else in this group says, no, we don't want you to hire that. Then YBHA goes and hires them. Like, I think that is a problem. So, or vice versa, right? Like, we're like, you should hire this, and, you know, so I think consensus is important, but I don't know that that should stifle like the contracts. If, you know, there are experts saying these are the best ones and here's why, then how do we form consensus around that? What are the, you know what I mean? So
No,
I think it has to be a nimble conversation of, like I said, a collaboration. And there might be somewhere about an RFP and there's just one that is far above beyond the best, right? And it's like, okay, well, these other ones aren't really viable.
Twice the price.
Right, and so those decisions I think are gonna be important. And it would be nice to have those discussions, when we are coming to consensus.
So I guess what I'm hearing is for major vendors and or potential even partners, when we get further down the line, the SCSC will be accountable. YBHA would be responsible doing the work to identify those potential vendors and or partners, but ultimately the decision would come from within this group, which makes this group accountable. It makes it so that YBHA isn't sitting on an island. We all, you know, agree
Yes.
about the direction forward. However, for smaller, less consequential vendors, contracts, because there will be many,
Yes,
that YBHA is both responsible and accountable
yes.
Consulting.
with consulting from the CSC.
Yeah, so from your perspective, is it a dollar amount? And where do you draw that line?
I think at this point, it's not defined, but it should be further defined so that we're clear on it. And perhaps the best step forward would be to sort of anticipate, and Jay, I see you wanting to jump in, but
No, I think we need to be careful not just to say, here's the dollar cap and cost is below, or we just kind of set ourselves up for, yeah.
yeah, scope. And so maybe it's a matter of, anticipating what those, who those vendors would be and what types of scopes we're going to need, and then getting, clarity on what consequence, or what constitutes as, like, meeting SCSC accountability versus YBJ accountability.
And that's that trust and flow of information. We're gonna have to put systems in place. We can do that pretty quickly.
Emily, are you, as like the YBHA staff person in the room, and Shannon and Sophia, are you comfortable with that? Like, does that sound like a path forward that could be successful? Where YBHA isn't on an island making decisions, but the accountability really lies with all of us? Is that like something that you feel is setting us up for, or are you like red flags?
I think that's the right balance between, being flexible and able to move forward efficiently, but also making sure that at the end of the day, for the major decisions, this group is accountable. So yes, I feel good. What you do?
No, I'm fine with it. I think that we don't want to lose track of the facts. You know, we're talking about managing the roadmap versus actually managing the implementation of a project. And then those decisions are going to be different.
Yeah.
They are going to be very, very different. You know, that's what Jason, the contract dollar for managing the road maps, lots of the contract dollar for managing implementation.
And then there's some decisions like materials testing and stuff. I mean, that's gonna be going, that's minutia that isn't gonna need to be involved in, but the bigger stuff, yeah. And then, as I said, then just dollar to the void. I can't tell you whenever I've had purchasing manuals, which I have now with $1, I see procurement requests like $10 below that limit all day long. Where folks, just gearing towards that to move forward and avoid internal democracy. So
And 4 of the same ones right in a row.
sometimes.
Cynical.
Clark, I saw your water.
That's why I was fucking.
Just glad it's, you know, my daughter will be happy.
To be fair, here's my water bottle.
That makes good sense. Very good sense. I had a feeling, I was like, I know exactly what happened.
That's actually funny. Isn't it?
She probably thought it was really weird that I kept drinking out of a water bottle yet. You're like, okay, well, you know, I guess we're working together.
I want to, before we move on from budget, I want to clarify on this one to secure necessary budget approval, supplemental budget requests. I see a question mark on SCSC here. What do folks think about that one?
So we wrote that one, and that was, again, this is for the budget for implementing the roadmap. And, I guess our hope is that all 3 entities would be contributing, funds to help implement the roadmap. And that, you know, that's going to require approval from YBHA Board of Directors if it's not already in the YBHA budget. City, through your process, the county, the county's already contributed via a grant, an existing grant, but just all that to say is like there is, this group can't make those decisions. They do not have a government's budget. So that's why we had the question mark.
I think, I see it, when I saw that signal, I saw it as like it's this group's responsibility to go, or we are accountable, like I am accountable to going to the county commissioners and requesting funds if needed, or talking through that if needed, like, you know what I mean? I think I'm accountable for doing that by sitting on this committee, so therefore our committee is accountable, I think, you know, just like Gail and Dave and Tom are they are responsible, accountable, the words are, you know, to going to city council and saying, here's what we can do. So I don't know, yeah, maybe I'm responsible, but this group's accountable, like I'm responsible to the BCC, you're responsible to the city council, you're responsible to YBHA, but then this group as a whole is ultimately accountable for securing that budget in whatever capacity that is.
We have a current grant agreement with the Housing Authority, which gives that authority a fair amount of latitude. Even with that in place, it's just good to let folks know what's going on. And that way the elected officials can respond when they get those external inquiries, which are already happening.
So then, oh, sorry.
You're welcome.
I think that these two are connected in so many ways. That I'm hearing, there's a piece of this which is securing necessary budget approvals to be able to each contribute funding. And that there's a role for all entities to contribute in some way and help to figure out securing that. This group's ultimately accountable to making sure that happens, with each entity responsible for going back to their individual boards.
Right, and that's why we put the BCC sticker there under the R. I don't think we're the only ones responsible, but I think, you know.
I think we added that pink underneath, right, or somebody did, right, that, cause I think that says city county.
Yeah, we.
Yeah, I agree. Didn't, huh?
That's a loose sticker.
That's my thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, good point. It didn't use pink.
Then, let's come over to comms for a second. So this came up as another example of a question which maybe splits out some of these items of where does SCSC comes in. So stakeholder advisory committees might have actually multiple tasks of like scheduling a committee, things like that. But then one person brought up, I forget who selects advisory committee members versus identify stakeholders, that type of thing. Where do you all see those lines between PM and SCSC on some of those pieces?
I think we were talking about the communication coming from SCSC
Mhm.
versus the housing authority, the project manager.
That made SESC responsible.
And accountable.
Are you the ones that,
Do that work?
the SCSC, the ones that identifies, that do the process, the stakeholders and the stakeholder, what if, and the advisory committees?
The way I would think is that the housing authority would put out kind of the requests for interested parties, collect the names, probably put together a recommendation. And then this group would bless that or say, hey, maybe we should change some of this up. It's just because we could spend a year picking advisory committees.
Yeah, and a lot of it also has to do with defining what we want the advisory
Yeah.
committees to do
Absolutely.
and how.
Are you saying that ultimately this group's accountable, or is it only consultant?
I would. I mean, that's the point of discussion, but I think this group would have to, approve that to also, I mean, it's just. In that type of thing, we're actually giving cover to the housing authority, saying, hey, we all agree that these are the right folks that we want on there. And it's once again, trying to keep the housing authority being on eye.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree.
I think as long as this group sort of determines what are the committees that we need, like we talked about the developer advisory committee, the communication or community engagement committee, other committees. And as Lou said, like determining the sort of like scope, what they would be doing. Then YBHA can run with identifying those people and, the work that goes into that process. And then bring it back to this group for approval, making the SCSC accountable.
So maybe, so YBJ is the responsible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Split this up a little bit of like solicit requests for committees, approve committee members. So that, sorry, I'm gonna put it from here. We can kind of differentiate that like YVHA is accountable here. It's SCSC here. And well, it's YVHA here as the responsible. But SCSC is basically consulted on like, okay, who do we want? YVHA executes the work. SCSC approves the committee members. In this sense, we're starting to see a general pattern here of SCSC provides direction. PM implements the work. SCSC approves the final direction. Does that feel like a true pattern?
Yes.
Okay. And that helps it so that we know we may not do every single activity exactly, but this is how starting to set up guardrails that we see happening here. The other one that I want to check in here is on the communications plan. When I look at this story, I see YVHA accountable. I see a consultant being responsible for executing it. City and BCC are consulted. Is there any role in this from the individual communications staff members at each entity?
I would say yes. Now, I mean, as we think about it from the perspective, if nothing else, in terms of just helping do the distribution, right? I mean, to the extent that the county has a communications team, we have a communications team. So if there are press releases to be distributed or, right, that we need to use the tools that we are each already have in place because we can't over communicate.
Yeah, I would,
Agree, Tom?
sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was just gonna say, I think it's important that each of our respective communication staff is just disseminating information in a timely manner, sharing things through our social media channels, newsletters, like whatever those avenues are. But that it's not the county's PIO or the city's, Mike Lane, it's not their job to put it together. Like, they're not responsible for creating the material. They should be handed something that is ready to go out in its final concept, whether that's like a social media graphic or a press release or a blurb to go in a newsletter, like.
And doesn't allow for any other interpretation by individual.
We're all putting out the same information. I think what the housing authority is putting out is what the city is putting out is what the county is putting out. But I don't think it's up to Amanda or Mike or, whoever to actually create that. I think they need to be handed something that is ready to go out. So I think that's where, I don't think they're responsible for the communications plan, but I do think they play a role in sharing it.
And I think all three of us have, entities at this table have community newsletters. We want to make sure all that messaging is consistent, so we don't end up and we're all putting out the same message, so it doesn't get interpreted by others from, oh, this is what the housing authority says, this is what the council says.
Yeah, I would say identical.
I got a pretty emphatic yes from Lorraine, who's YBHA's communication. Do you see us as being responsible?
Yeah, and then I agree with almost everything that's being said. I would say that in terms of like the outlets that we have access to these days, people are paying attention to communications that are genuine. And so like creating carbon copies that are going out through each outlet, I'm not sure I fully am on board with that. I just think like there is some room for like a little bit of injection of each of our platforms, sort of branding and vibes and all of that. But yeah, generally I'm agreeing with what's being said.
So then I would put disseminate materials here, all three staff. YVHA ultimately accountable, knowing it looks like we're potentially working with outside contractors to help with capacity.
Yeah, and I think we just need maybe clarification on the status of Manifest Communications contract and if that is, and anyway, just that we had that as other because they're currently involved.
Brad, do you have any update on that?
They're still under contract. I can't remember the term date of the contract. Although I don't think so either.
I mean, it might be worthwhile, going back to something Ann said yesterday, in terms of the three buckets of responsibilities and, in terms of communications being one of them, we would look, we talked about having Lorraine manage whatever consultant brought on.
Yes.
Not that we
Yeah, and I think,
about that, but that's okay.
I think that like, this is a good example of like, do we, if Manifest is done, do we hire a PR firm to help us with this? Do we hire communications team? Like, what does that budget look like? And then this is a good example of, I think that is a big enough decision where it would be like SCSC is ultimately accountable for the hiring of any communications or PR thing that we put out there. YVHA maybe does the legwork, but then that's coming back to us with, okay, who applied, who do we want to handle these communications, who we want to handle our PR, whatever that looks like. I just think that's a good example of what we were talking about in terms of how this group is involved, and where the money comes from.
All right, then I'm gonna move us over to managing schedule and deliverables. Something like developing meeting cadence. When I see SCSC here, I think you all have a discussion and say we want to meet monthly. PM implement stuff.
Yes.
That's true. Okay. Talk me through the others that are here for executing meeting logistics and developing meeting materials pre-post.
I think that means that we want to be facilitated.
Okay.
I think YVHA put those stickers in.
Yeah. Although that's not my right.
This one.
This is not the part.
I think we put those down at the same time.
Okay.
So there would be some other facilitator.
I think then generally we're getting to the point where this general pattern applies. anyways, I'm trying to check in with anything that we might want to, I think overall, this was the most confusing one around executing the roadmap. I gave you these, and I think it's a little bit hard because I tried to stay at the high level of project management tasks, and then you can dive into the roadmap pieces itself. I think once we finalize your roadmap, this is where now you have a document you can each take back to your council board and say, where do you all see us in this process needing to be consulted or responsible, basically meaning like we need a decision in this. Well, there's one person who's accountable for moving that forward. But I think this is where you can take the R role as like for STR tax funds, it has to go back to city council, right? And then you can clearly delineate that out once we finalized your roadmap a little bit more.
Given this conversation, Jay and Haka, do you still think BCC should responsible party for determining timelines?
No, I meant that like.
She wanted something in the R category.
Important. I think that like mostly it was like taking it back again, like taking it back to the county commissioners and being like, how fast do we want to move on this? What's our like mostly like responsible for bringing that back to the group, but not necessarily responsible for all of it. So we can be consulted or move that to where you feel like it fits best. But yeah.
Maybe there's a piece to that actually we add to, I'm thinking about communications, because there's one piece around report out to decision makers. YVHA is the accountable here. But I'm wondering if we need to have all three entities as responsible here, because each one of you are going back to your respective boards and we're explicitly naming that's your role.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if like something comes out on this project or on this thing and we have a county commissioner, not myself, or a city council member who is like, whoa, I had no idea this was going on. How did we get here? I think that is a failure of the responsibility of like us on, you know what I mean? It's our responsibility to make sure we are informing our respective boards and committees.
Okay, and then let's see if we've got anything. So we primarily got SCSC here for defined shared goals, which we've been doing, basically setting the priorities for this. I think that makes sense. Mediating conflict is another area that has SCSC here. Versus the other things are facilitating, meeting support, communication strategy, identified committees are all not having SCSC as the accountable party. Does that feel okay?
See that the SCSC would actually be probably accountable for all things team collaboration.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, I think we probably raked roles and responsibilities over the goals a little bit. But I think that now we have some overall guardrails. Yeah.
I do have just one question. I'm kind of thinking about that from a team collaboration. I mean, it is absolutely all of our responsibilities, but are we contemplating that we can continue to need a facilitator? I mean, I think about, the benefit of having had you all here, Caitlin Clark, in terms of when, giving the space, right, for somebody to say, I'm not quite on board. And I think the productive conversation that we've been able to have in terms of actually driving something to consensus.
I think that also, like, we're gonna keep momentum and cadence going with the facilitator, in my opinion. That's how I feel. I think that there's, if we don't want to slow down, if we don't want to kind of take 5 steps back before we take more steps forward, having like a guided, here's when your next meeting will be, here's the, like, we are going to do this, is valuable.
I would agree. I think it will also depend on where we are in the process. right now, I think, I view this as there are a lot of loose ends. Loose ends require facilitation.
Maybe it's a response, maybe I mean, we ultimately all are accountable, and quite frankly, even our bodies are accountable. I mean, maybe, as we talked about team collaboration, right, from the perspective of, we can all collaborate and can come to consensus in this organization, but to the extent that it is then incumbent upon us, you know, particularly from a city council perspective, to make sure that we're all moving in the right direction. So I think, you know, even though one party is responsible for accountability, I think that in terms of team collaboration, I think so maybe, you know, we're all responsible.
Well, I think we all are agreed to hold ourselves accountable to collaboration. It's the overseeing the collaboration process that I think you're saying, we need somebody that's responsible for that. And that's the role that you guys have been playing, keeping us moving, scheduling your meetings, you know, making sure we have a facilitated discussion. So I do think you're right. This group is accountable pretty much for everything, but ultimately we do need a responsible party to keep us forward.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Any concerns about that? Okay, so, generally, this is all SCSC is accountable at the team collaboration level, but you're gonna have external parties to help you move through this process and be in the responsible role to create that container.
Yeah, before you move on.
Yeah.
We've had our first visitor at this meeting. And so I was wondering if you wanted to say something or are you just listening?
I'm just listening.
Okay. Just wanted to give you the opportunity.
Curious what y'all are doing.
Is that?
Well, thanks for being here. So not first in-person visitor.
First in.
We've had.
That's right, there are electronic visitors.
You're off the couch. You there.
All right, so that gets us going for roles and responsibilities. Now I want to take us back into our agenda for talking about communications and community engagement, and then we're going to pull the full roadmap together. And I'm going to turn this over to Lorraine to talk a little bit about communications.
Cool. So this feels like a little bit of an aside, just because we're gonna get just slightly more like tactical in some of our conversation here. But I think we can go through some of this somewhat quickly, and because of the fact that the word communications is coming up so much, it probably just merits a little bit more discussion here. So just to clarify, like where my head is at, I think sometimes we tend to use communications and community engagement interchangeably. And so I want to kind of just distinguish for purposes of the discussion right now. We're going to start by talking about kind of, from my perspective, external communication. So when I'm looking over here at this piece of paper, I see a lot of like internal comms stuff, which we can also discuss, but let's focus on external comms and then we'll move on. I'm going to need some help with the community engagement stuff because that's a little bit more in depth. But so another thing, just to kind of contextualize for where we're at right now, I sort of feel like we are, in terms of communications, already amidst phase 1 and phase 2. The governance and groundwork phase where we are right now, we decided that the goal of building trust in the process is just going to involve increased regularity of communications, dependability, timeliness, and clarity. And so we're sort of learning by doing right now, even through this steering committee phase, in terms of like how we interrelate between our different comms entities, between different methods of communication that we're using more regularly. We don't all necessarily have a standard that we're all adhering to in terms of like how often we post on social media, how often our newsletters come out, what the tone of what we're presenting is. And so we're learning as we go, and I would really love to continue honing in on that. I think something that we really want to do throughout this entire process, something that the community wants to see, is that it's not just a YVHA driven effort. And so as we have this conversation about shifting project management stuff back to YVHA, I just want to emphasize that we still want to make sure that like the group project vibes are still being projected to the community. And so while just to pull back out what we were talking about, whether like communications need to perfectly mirror and echo each other, I still think it needs to be a more genuine, yes, we're all putting very similar messaging out, and it has the same sort of like when you boil it down, it means the same thing, but we are genuinely using our perspectives as different agencies. And so for governance and groundwork phase, just back to phase one here, we talked about some specific, yeah, anyone can interrupt me at any point.
I want to stop you there because
Great.
I agree with you to a certain point.
Okay.
Because I think what happened last time was the messaging was not consistent. And there was different approaches.
You mean between entities different? Yeah.
And we all know that people interpret things differently. So I would argue that as close as possible, the same messaging go out.
Yeah.
You might have your different brand or you might have your slightly different tone, but I want to make sure that we're setting the expectations that we're not saying the housing authority can just sort of take their approach and the city can take their approach and the county can take their approach because we have different audiences. And I would argue all of our audiences are the same. And I think the messaging and communications needs to be, if not exactly the same, close to it.
Yeah. And then we get into questions of frequency and regularity. And so, yeah, it will need to come to a shared point on all of that for sure. I respect that for sure, Tom. So potential communications elements for phase one. And again, we're already in it. So we're taking care of this as we go. We're fine tuning our overall internal comm strategies. Part of that is happening here. Part of that is happening in our Zoom calls with Manifest and with all these other project management folks. Again, so like some things that have brought up interesting discussion already are whether this project needs to have its own like website and landing page, because that's something that has just brought up this sort of like conflict. Does the information live on the YVHA site? Does the city engage Steamboat page need to house everything? And these really get to these questions about like where people are going for that information and all of that. So again, ongoing conversation. Providing regular meeting summaries and updates via press, paper, social media outlets. Again, we're doing our best with that right now. Will be great to hone in on that moving forward. Something we haven't done, and then I would argue moving forward, we might want to do more of is sharing more about our steering committee members and the makeup of this committee more specifically in terms of, not to get into minutia, but like member bios and kind of explaining more to the public about why this is the structure that we've chosen and these are the folks who are representing these entities. And then just continuing to clarify the milestones and timeline as they are firmed up. So the next one, as far as clarifying needs, constraints, and opportunities, the reason I say that it feels like we're already in this one comms wise is that it's just kind of, I don't want to say it's organically happening around us, but a good example is in the paper the other day was the city's housing needs assessment coming back out, which is like completely related to everything that we're doing. And that is sort of like helping us clarify our needs. So things are happening around us in terms of that establishment without us necessarily like driving that bus. But we do consider that to be sort of more of the assessment phase. I kind of want to move quickly through that one just in terms of y'all's discussion yesterday about how much time we're potentially going to spend on assessments and community polling and gathering those types of information. So I don't know how far we're going to be going down that path. But again, I think we can do a lot of this work. Like, let's say we're not doing any more of the polling the community and like, you know, ripping things out from the roots again. Well, then we can reuse. And this came up yesterday. And I don't mean reuse, but breathe fresh energy into very recent and pertinent past work in order to continue moving through that phase of clarifying the needs and all of that. Phase 3, developing the Slate Creek neighborhood plan. So again, depends how far we're going down this road with community engagement, but as far as the communications, just continuing to execute those scenario comms, providing continued storytelling around the project and project updates, and starting to develop graphic materials that sort of demonstrate to folks choices and trade-offs and all of that. And then lastly, policy alignment and implementation. This is when we are trying to build confidence in the preferred path forward amongst the community before we potentially go to a vote or whatever it ends up being, establishing final path summaries and all of that. So keeping folks informed, keeping folks engaged. But yeah, this is as far as we've gotten with a draft communications plan. And I think we can probably bump to the next slide about community engagement if you're ready to do that, Cal. Are there any questions about our conversations around external communications thus far?
The only question I have, this is all my observation. This is all information going out.
Yeah.
This is not dealing with anything coming in or in response to this information we send out.
I think then you'd be getting into engagement.
Okay.
If we're talking semantics.
We're doing things.
Anyway,
I want to pause here before we go into community engagement, because as they were putting together this plan, there are pieces in here that were drafted into the plan that are really dependent on, like, depending on what community engagement happens, how do we communicate about it? So there's an if then there, so you're seeing a really high level picture. But this is the kind of point where I want you all to be able to give any advice, basically in a consultant role to Lorraine and the comms partners here. What you like looking at this, does this generally feel like the flow you'd like to see from a comms plan? Or is there anything at a high level that you think these comms folks should really consider?
And to me, just like the big picture goal is that we're establishing a shared set of facts within the community. That's a tall order. But to me, that should be the kind of overlying goal that goes across all of these phases.
And one voice.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, let's go ahead and go into community engagement now. And I'm gonna go ahead and have you bring out your legal size paper to look at this, because it's not nice up on a screen. Okay, so again, we're gonna look at the high level of, we want to be able to get from this group an overall direction around community engagement that would pair with the roadmap. So that a more detailed plan can be put in place. So this, I drafted these 4 scenarios for you based on the prioritization that you all did last time about what were key moments that you want to get more with the community, get more input from the community, hear from folks maybe with lived experience, engage with the community, and where would you want technical expertise to shine through? So that's also dependent on if your roadmap changes and your milestones change a little bit, then this shifts too. But I want to give you 4 examples that's a mix and match of different things, so you can see how different community engagement strategies balance some of the different things that we were talking about in that polarity management activity last time. So on the very left, you have the general approach, and then you, on the very right, can see benefits and trade-offs. So I'm gonna just high level talk through these, and I want your input then on, like, okay, how would you like to see this? So approaching is really about like an ambassador program. So you're thinking through developing a community advisory group alongside the developer advisory. Potential also that you think about a local funding partnership advisory here, businesses, employers, school district, they might get folded into you might have different configurations of this, but you're thinking about advisory teams that work alongside you that become ambassadors of this process throughout. In this case, you might look at something of, these ambassadors have a role in executing the community engagement as well, of like helping to solicit, feedback on surveys and things like that. And that they're helping to refine the products after you get them back from the community. So the advisory committee says, okay, here's what we heard. We're gonna now update maybe your purpose and principles based on what we heard from the community, that type of thing. This one also focuses on some elements of like survey data to solicit, versus the next approach thinks about engaging in more two-way communication between community members with that advisory committee helping to actually host those conversations throughout the community. Anytime you're doing workshops, you're doing two-way communication, it increases the amount of effort you have to use to design good engagement that supports those conversations. However, you avoid one of the things that can happen with surveys, which is when I answer a survey, I'm speaking from my individual perspective and it's going into aggregate. So then a group like this says, okay, well, majority vote said X, right? Or we're going to go with that. If I fall into the minority, it can have a kickback effect in the sense that I contributed to a community engagement process, but now I feel like I wasn't heard because my decision wasn't implemented. When you have two-way communication between community members, they're having to wrestle through trade-offs in a different way than a survey enables them to. So that's it's higher touch community engagement when you do two-way, but it has the potential to have folks understand trade-offs in different ways, which can be helpful in a really complex piece like this. Approach C focuses on using technology. So there's actually, I want to talk about one other piece with approach B. Later on, one approach you can use in community engagement is something called a civic assembly. Fort Collins recently used this approach with, they had a parcel of land, Hughes Stadium. Hughes Stadium moved onto campus and the community said, what do we do with this land? Kind of similar in some sense. There's conversations about conservation, housing, those types of things. They selected a random lottery. So basically they sent out 15,000 mailers to community residents, households. And from that selected a random group of 20 to come together for 2 days and put forth a proposal on what to do with the land with some constraints. That then went to city council for approval and then went to a ballot initiative that then got supported. There was another competing ballot initiative that came onto the ballot with a petition to conservation on the site versus what came up with the civic assembly. But the civic assembly proposal ended up getting the majority vote. This would be different from the DST in that DST was folks who volunteered to step into that role, who had some vested interest in this in some ways. And so it can be, you get a couple different trade-offs. You do, for something like this, for a true civic assembly, provide stipends for folks to come together for 2 days. So you have a group that is representative of your census data in the community. So you can say, we took a slice of the community and here's what they recommended when they considered this. You're doing depth, you're doing a smaller group. You're not getting a full wide selection, but you're getting a really representative group. That's one option in this, that something has been really contentious in your community to be able to say, we took a random sample of the community and they looked at 3 scenarios and here's what they said. Okay, something like that. Approach C instead focuses on breadth. Let's get as many voices in as possible and says, let's use tech tools that can help us survey folks at scale And then let's engage community members on a couple of technical topics that we want to bring together, random groups together, maybe based on DST folks, something like that. And then lighter touch of hosting online forums versus in-person ones, that's cost effective, but has lower touch. Approach D is probably the lightest approach for community engagement that really focus on your stakeholders who have the potential to really support or block the proposal. But this group is doing the major work of building off of previous engagement to say, what have we heard? What do we think will work? And then just presenting those during workshops to key stakeholders when you've got some draft scenarios planned. Okay, so I'd love to hear, this is not like pick one per se, but it gets into the different choices and trade-offs you have in community engagement. And the purpose in this is to really just see what are your priorities in this, right? So we'd love to hear what do folks appreciate and what do you have concerns about?
Been involved in a lot of controversial public works projects. We've always had a citizens advisory committee, and more times than not, the citizens advisory committee was brought along and educated, and the hope was they represented the community. Invariably, they don't represent the entire community, or there are outside influences that have nothing to do with the community. There's that outside influence. And then the advisory committee gets ostracized. And we don't accomplish what we attended. Here, this is all about. And so I think there has to be some way of getting an understanding of the community. If surveys aren't it, how do you do that? How do you engage? Can we have big broad meetings where you gather information or you have exchange ideas? I know we had some town meetings early on in the Brown Ranch state that were almost frightening because something, crazy stuff that would come up. So whatever we do, I think it's going to be a combination of this. If we have a specific issue, the approach C, we have soils concerns. Soils people got together and 99% of the population was now satisfied.
I think as you look at all four of these approaches, there's a time for each one in the process. Kind of like what Lou was alluding to, is that it's not just one or the other. It's like upfront, there's all kinds of feedback, engagement. The actual design phase is going to have a different outreach process. And then when we're completed, it's going to be different as we move forward to a vote. So I think there needs to be, once again, a little flexibility and kind of map out, like, here's the goals for the first set, the second, third, fourth, as we move through.
Gail? Weren't you gonna talk? Okay.
Yeah.
I was oversensitive to, I try and track.
No, I mean, I think that makes sense, but was trying to kind of think through from a process perspective, how you actually facilitate that.
Absolutely.
Right, so, thank you for calling. So, yeah, other people's opinion.
I think, I agree that there's a time and a place for each of these approaches to potentially be used throughout the process, but as I'm reading through these and hearing your descriptions, Kale, and it just like furthers, my thought that we really do need an outside consultant. As if we set the well, really need experts, guys, for us, because it's in a lot and it's in depth, and who's going to facilitate. We have these meetings, if we do mailers, it's what I think to set aside and really pick that has demonstrated a demonstrated track record in history engaging in communities like ours on issues like this, where we can really feel like a comprehensive approach. So you you just presented further fact that that's opinion.
Great. Gotta get the red on that. Honestly, we need your. We need. This is. This is the corporate.
One of these. Right, from the perspective of. You know, is where the community is, and, and certainly, right, I could think that. All of this are dependent on us, right, in terms of, right, if we just do the basic, versus. I don't know if it's, but your all experiences. And. Not really an approach, but it's. Approaches based on. In the process, as well as where the community. You want to go?
Pursued one.
No. We've had destruction, right?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is, you know, our approach almost always balances what we call breadth and depth. You want both in engagement. Breadth lets you reach a lot of people. So that's things like technology, big workshops. There's so many different ways to reach more people and get more touches. It's more accessible for people, so that's easier. And it tends to be, you know, more affordable in certain ways, but it's more superficial. It's inherently less depthful. There's less connection. So in terms of like people actually relating to one another, strengthening trust. And then the other thing that's hard to do in that context is, which I think in this case is going to potentially be worth discussing, is problem solving. And it's hard to problem solve in a survey. You're inherently sort of like, I like this versus that. And you can offer depth in a survey question, but that, you know, that it's in general, that's what we call breadth. And then depth is where you can get into deeper types of dialogue, smaller group settings, one-on-one interviews, storytelling. And so in general, like we typically think of ways that you can bring breadth and depth in each stage of a process. And then it's thinking too about sort of almost more, I think Kale was saying this in a way too, I think sort of what are the guiding principles you want to work from? In a sense, if you have a situation where, for example, you know, it's going to be important to, you know, bring together some differing perspectives and maybe strengthen some trust between the way people are seeing each other in the problem, then that's something you need to sort of design in. It's a very, it's I don't want to say it's an easy thing to do, but once you decide that's something you want to do, you can do it. In certain cases, that's less of an issue. So you don't necessarily have to design that in. Another example is if you're working inherent complexity of the issue and people's depth of understanding of it, or generally their lack of understanding, makes it difficult for people to sort of engage in a way that is substantial, meaning which tends to take your typical public engagement towards like, well, we'll just put some choices in front of them and let them use sticky dots and things. So instead of that, you know, realizing, you know, we would do better over the long haul if we actually utilized this process to help people get it more, like to help people understand this topic. And there are ways you can design that into your engagement as well, so that there's an element of kind of learning in the process of problem solving, which interestingly also is one of the best ways to create some connection between people who don't necessarily see things the same way. So, and then I guess the only other thing I would say at a high level is, so basically I'm agreeing like, yeah, you want to sort of, in my mind, you'd want to mix these things up. And then you really want to think about sort of stage by stage, what are going to be the important sort of points at which, like, where do we need to get to with community members at each stage? Then the final, I think, concept is really one that you guys were vacillating between yesterday of like, how much engagement do we really want? We only do it, and it's actually from a practical expediency of we have a real implementation bias. So the only way we do engagement is significant because over the years, we've come into too many places and projects where the engagement wasn't right the first time. Now they can't implement the project. There's a bunch of community pushback. So they're gonna have to go back and redo it. It's been like so many times where we've had to, yeah, feel familiar. So many times we've had to do that and come in and sort of redo a process for somebody. And the cool thing is, you know, people are always like, wow, we're never gonna do it. And then you can unlock things and it happens. So, but it does take, you know, people need to be engaged. But I appreciate both perspectives on that, that not necessarily everybody in the group thinks that we need a lot of engagement here. I think that's a choice you guys are gonna have to make.
Do you mind? Or just a follow-up would be, I mean, you guys obviously have a lot of knowledge in terms of having been involved in this process, right? And been engaged with community dialogue and discussions. What can you, whether either kind of like identify an issue or, I mean, you know, based upon that, kind of what would be your guidance? But so kind of taking what you said and like applying it to the situation.
I can take that on, but also I want to make sure, maybe there will be things that we can add once we hear from other people too.
Perfect.
I just wanted to mention, I think it's important to have the lead on this and the communication side, have a thorough understanding of the community. And not that they have to live here, but have a basis for how the pulse of the community works. Every community works different and communicates differently. And like Lou mentioned, the public works side of projects, I can't tell you how many projects I've been involved in where the contractor brings in a comms team and they just miss it. And the first day of the project, my phone rings off the hook, like, what the hell's going on? Well, they missed how that community would communicate with each other. So having that understanding the cadence of things and how things work, you know, certain things in Route County and Steamboat, the written press isn't as prominent in terms of a major communication tool as it could be with folks with a nonprofit local newspaper, which every single person reads and knows exactly what's going on. So it's just like an example of making sure we have folks who understand the area as part of the process.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that because, you know, we missed it the first time. I wasn't here for that outreach program, but I'm not sure who was doing the outreach. Was it YDHA alone? Or was it a collaborative effort? I suspect it was one, but I don't know. The second is, how do you know who to reach? And that's, you know, if there was a complaint, that was the complaint, you didn't reach me. You know, I'm an important citizen of Steamboat Springs and you didn't even talk to me. How do you know when you've reached the right audience and the right spectrum of audience?
When the vote passes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I would just speak to them like, it sounds like we're starting from ground zero on the problem. I mean, you really have like 11% of the electric to switch over. And I'm not saying that we should disregard, but if the outcome is to build affordable housing, I think the naysayers last time just said size and expense and
Traffic and.
also all size and expense. I mean, well, they sat in front of city council and said, build 400 homes, and they were told no. And, you know, so I think the appetite for this development is out there. I think we're, in my humble opinion, going down the rabbit hole of over communicating or over analyzing the conflicts. I don't think there's that many conflicts on this size and scale development. And I think, you know, what Clark was outlining, as much as I could understand it, is like a 2-year process. If you're gonna identify every conflict that every community member might have or every vision.
Just to be clear, that isn't actually what I was saying.
Well,
You don't want to go through every conflict that every community member has.
but I mean, the breadth and depth that, I mean, I've seen in burnout, the word burnout. I would tell you that almost everybody that I talk to on both sides are like, oh, you're in the Slate Creek Steering Committee. And he's like, how's that going? You know, really, again? And I'm like, no, I think we're making progress and I think we're focused in and they're like, oh, okay, that's good. But I think the outreach, you might end up turning off the very people that you're trying to convert again. And that's just my opinion, like consultants and surveys and they all, the conservative people are just like, how many more are we gonna do? And it's for everything, and it's in every aspect of government right now. And so, I mean, it's the buzzword that fiscals hate and, liberals love. So, if you're trying to reach the people that voted no last time, and I don't know if you are, I mean, it seems like you already have the base that would vote for this. I don't think there's the opposition that you think that's out there. That's my personal.
So, I mean, I think some of the things we're looking at on two-way feedback is like unit mix, for example. Like, everybody wants a single family home till you have to pay for it. And so the per unit subsidy on this project will be the hot button issue no matter what. And how we describe that per unit subsidy, if we're oversizing the utilities for a future phase, are we building that into the per unit subsidy for each house? Or are we communicating that's a base subsidy for the future, development? So there, I think there's things we do need feedback on. I don't disagree with you not to overcomplicate it. But there are going to be some trigger points on this.
So,
And the trade-offs, I think Emily highlighted that yesterday really well, of like, we need the community to understand, yes, we could do this, but then here's what we're giving up if we do that. Or, yeah, we could do all three of these things, but then here's what that's gonna cost. And so it is, I think you said it's like pulling levers to figure out like, and I think the community needs to understand those levers, and the way they're gonna understand it is through community engagement. We need to show them, like Jay said, like totally, yeah, I would love a single family home with an acre and like yeah, give me my dream, but like how much is that gonna cost and how many homes will be able to provide at that, versus being able to provide someone with a condo or a townhome that they can own and build that equity and build that those roots here in this community. So I think explaining those trade-offs is going to be the important part of community engagement.
so how do we, okay, if we bring on a community engagement consultant, how do we put the guardrails around them to do exactly that and not, as Dave is saying?
Oh, I
too
think
much?
we use like this, right? Like we are ultimately accountable for the community engagement. Whoever we hire is responsible for actually doing it. But as the group accountable, like we are giving them direction, and we put that in the RFP. Like, this is what we're looking for. This is the timeline we're looking for it at. Like, I don't know that today is the time to have that conversation, but like I think it's this group's responsibility to say, we want to get this done in 12 months. Here is our plan for that, and submit us a proposal telling us how you're gonna accomplish this in 12 months. And here are the things we want to highlight, right? Like it's our job to put up the guardrails.
What I've heard so far, both between the activity we did last time and through the conversation yesterday and today, is there's three key points that I'm hearing there's like a 3.5. Okay, so first one is prioritizing basically those design principles that you all have identified that you've heard from the community, to say in this version of it, how should this group in their design be thinking through the prioritization of those to be able to establish a vision for this version of it. So it's about goal setting. There's one piece that's about vision. The second piece is around housing mix, and thinking through how folks would prefer it to meet different income density types. And then the third one is in the actual scenario planning of identifying a preferred scenario after considering the trade-offs. Those are, I think, the three pieces that I think would create your guardrails for how you engage the community.
What was the third one?
Is the preferred sale on a scenario planning of like, when we consider the trade-offs, what will be our preferred? Your half is if there's going to be technical topics that you need some amount of engagement around, similar to soils report. Where you need to have conversations with the community on some technical topics. So with those three criteria, then you can figure out, okay, when are we using surveys? When are we using in-person workshops? Those types of things across those. Where are we working with advisory committees? But that's where I hear is the key kind of points that you need to engage the community this time. Do you have other thoughts on that, though?
Yeah, I probably see it differently depending on what you guys want to do, but I think I think those are a couple key ones. The goals is kind of classic thing. If you want people to engage and sort of support where you're going, I think it's key, really important thing to know. You guys have a lot to build on, right? So you're not in a place where you're starting from scratch and going to begin sort of, should we even be looking, it's not that. I think where you guys really are and the timeline, we do have an updated sort of timeline in here that I think is pretty, efficient in terms of getting it done. But you get that, you could do that and do engagement around clarity, refining and checking in on goals and priorities and principles in the, next couple months. We could be done with that by the end of the summer. I think the work around scenario evaluation is, I guess what I'll say to step back is you have a choice to make of whether you want to involve people in a way where they get to help you solve some problems. And there's a plus side to that, which is that people tend to be way more supportive of the things that they're involved in designing and creating. And it does elevate overall kind of capacity, community capacity for these issues. Or do you want to do something where you sort of create solutions for people to respond to? We tend to find that the former actually has more implementation benefit. But I think depending on what you want to do, there's different things. The reason I bring that up is because there's a lot of problem solving potential from the end of the kind of assessment work where you're taking a look at the feasibility and constraints and housing choices and what everybody wants, and start thinking about strategies that you could use some pretty cool engagement for people to come in and be like, all right, help us think about how to respond to the things we learned here as a setup for the scenario planning, because the sort of strategies and ideas that you would come up with there can then be passed into the scenario planning. The other thing is at that stage, you can involve people in a discussion around what are the things we want to measure here, which is another way of saying like, what's really important to us in this? Because if you're using scenario planning tools, one of the really nice things about them, and I'm not sure if any of you guys got to see the materials I sent last night, but is they give you all these metrics. So engaging people and saying, what are the important metrics to look at, whether the whole community or, smaller groups, which is more targeted and can be more efficient, is another place. And I think that goes along with what you were saying. And then there's probably, what I would recommend is in that space too, some work around the physical planning and design kind of refinements of a final plan and engaging people and sort of saying, do you like this? Did we nail it? Is this right? In a way that aligns what you're hearing from the community, making sure you're getting in the technical kind of revisions so that it's actually, everything's feasible and lined up. So, that's more or less what you're saying, but I think just adding in that there's some space in there. One way to do it is be like, there's 3 points at which we want people to get involved. Another way is to think about kind of a process arc where you still have the same basic thinking, but it doesn't, hopefully, and maybe you weren't implying this, but hopefully it doesn't end up feeling like, a set of workshops right here, a set of workshops right there. But instead, people who want to stay involved more throughout can, and they see a linear sort of progression through everything. So, but just to be really clear on what I mean, I guess I'm suggesting it only because you see it all the time, is it doesn't have to be, this doesn't have to take 7 years of your life at all. It's just about doing it a certain way when you do it. And, you can do it quite efficiently. It's just a matter of deciding what is our orientation to this. Is our orientation one where we're gonna kind of come in and ask people to check our work? Or is our orientation one where we actually want to involve the community in some of the work?
The other thing I want to acknowledge just for a second is, like, as a facilitator, I like, this is the hardest conversation probably to facilitate because I do have a perspective on this, right? We've separated our roles a little bit so Clark can come in more with his expertise, and then you've got me as like, I'm not a housing expert in the same way Clark is, right? I do have, we both on this one have to be transparent that to work with us means doing community engagement going forward. And that's one choice in this process that you all have to make on that. And so we did come in with the thought that we'd help you through these conversations. Then we step out for you all to make a decision around, do you go with another contractor? Do you help go with us moving forward on this? And so we'll have that time coming up. But overall, for any contractor you work with, there's got to be a way that you all are able to provide an overall direction to them that has some consensus, because otherwise that contractor gets pulled in different directions from this group. Emily, what were you going to say?
I don't know if this is helpful, but I was gonna also look back for 27 seconds. So that's what I'm on community engagement. I do think that when YBHA was developing the plan, there was a significant amount of community engagement that went into developing the creating the community development plan. And I think that where we failed was in communicating and also engaging around the annexation agreement with the city of Steamboat Springs. And so I just want to encourage the group to not just look at the design phase, but then when we move on from coming up with a preferred scenario and moving into working through what the elements of an annexation agreement would be, acknowledging that this is not a negotiation, it's a collaboration, but there are going to be really difficult issues that we have to wrestle with. And that's a key place where we do need to get meaningful engagement. And that would be a key difference in this time around versus a few years ago.
Bringing Zach, I appreciate that content from the perspective, hopefully. Okay. It's back to the wrestling and trade-offs, right? Because I think that's exactly right. When we were doing the development and then when you get into the annexation, now you're talking about what are the trade-offs, right? From a cost perspective, transportation perspective, all of the kind of issues that we were worked through from the annexation perspective.
But
So I think those have to be moved up.
This round is different than that, because we're talking about a scale that's significantly smaller. We've already done the municipal services analysis that basically is saying this isn't gonna cost the city very much, other than maybe a few FTEs. We can handle the services for this scale of development. So a lot of those really difficult negotiations that we had about who's paying for this and who we can handle this are not gonna come into play this round. So I think that's not to say we're not gonna grapple with some of those discussions, but I think the discussions will be a lot simpler because we've already sort of established what the threshold is to move forward.
So from a community engagement standpoint, all he's saying, there's a scenario. May not be well defined at this point in time. That scenario says, 200 to 500 units or whatever. And whatever, honestly, I'm not sure how much it matters other than cost impacts and stuff like that. But is that what we want the community to engage in? I think what I heard from Dave was, let's not talk about the universe and the sky and the stars and everything else. Let's talk about 200, 500 units.
Right.
I think that's. What you
We
said.
still have transportation.
Well,
We still-
transportation was a huge issue.
We still have the bus, we still have CDOT, we have Highway 40, depending upon where it is. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but
Well, I agree,
It's
but what
not.
we said in
What's
municipal
the-
services is that we're not providing a bus up to there. We're gonna provide one bus with a roundabout out of Slate Creek. That's what we can do. That's not really much to negotiate. That's what's set in stone.
is that acceptable?
We've said that the transportation impact on Highway 40 is relatively negligible. It's not gonna be a big impact. So we don't have to talk about expanding Highway 40 and all that at this point, which was a big ticket item last time around. So I think some of those have sort of already been resolved by us sort of drawing a line in the sand saying, we can do this. Can't do anything beyond it.
And what that assumes, you go ahead.
No, well, I think this is a very big point. I mean, this is the difference between, this organic community engagement program versus, won't call it inorganic, but it's very defined.
It's very defined.
And I think that's a really big deal.
With the
Is that
caveat
okay?
of saying that we can't build more without coming back in. And that's the huge difference in this whole annexation is
I
that.
go back to Jay's point, right? I mean, about the size of the water pipe.
Well, it's just how we
Structure.
communicate what we're building and why, and whether that's being, I mean, what the public's gonna focus on, and it happens on these projects all the time, is what's either the per bed or per unit subsidy, and how we define that, how we pay for that. And then does that include oversizing infrastructure, or do we communicate that differently? I know I'm getting into the weeds on that, but that's where
That's a trade.
we're gonna get a lot of feedback on things. And then also the mix, because that's all gonna relate back to the subsidy. First, I always go back to the need versus the want, I love a single family home. My stage of life, I'm never gonna buy another single family home.
I would love a large regional park developed with soccer fields and
No.
playgrounds and water features and but we can't afford it, right? So all of those come into play.
I'd like 400-inch winter.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Temperatures.
I think it's just important because for it in general, in the context of like talking about this, there's a tendency to refer to anything that doesn't feel like we're just going and doing it right now to like fluff and we're looking at the stars and universe. And that language is not careful at all. You guys don't have really a community engagement program that anybody's proposed. So so nothing's out there. Really all you have is some tactical choices that are there to help you look at things. So I just want to say like that when you're unclear in your language like that, it doesn't support good decision making. And in actuality, in the context of a community that's spending all this money because of the way that it didn't work last time, it doesn't point towards like clear thinking moving forward. You want to be more careful in terms of being like, if there's an inorganic or an organic, out there thing where people are proposing trust falls and things like that, like, let's talk about it. But that's not on the table. So just be careful when you're talking about these things because we do take it seriously. And there's nothing we do that's inefficient. We're operating in business here. We do this all over the place. The stuff we do is, we win awards for it and it gets stuff built. So it's not there just, and we don't do it as consultants. So we're not out there for the money side of it. And we're good at it. So I just want to be clear, like when you are, and so I do take exception to it because you don't have to work with us, but I want you to be clear in your thinking on making that decision. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Built many things. Very comfortable.
But I'm probably, I'm coming at it from the perspective also of, having been through the first annexation and, we maybe had 5 people showing up complaining before the annexation vote. Maybe.
There was a lot of chatter in the community.
There was chatter in the community, but again, just as much chatter in terms of people supportive, people, but as I say, we had a lot of conversations in the council, and as I say, and at the BRAC meetings and maybe 5 people, right?
Yeah.
So I absolutely, appreciate what you're hearing and absolutely want to move as efficiently as possible. But I want to make sure that we're successful this time. And so, again, certainly there's lots of different scenarios out there and want to make sure that whatever we move forward with is that we are successful, that we're meeting community need and we're addressing the community's concerns. So
Maybe earlier I'd ask, do you know offhand how many public engagement meetings and I don't know, get-togethers you guys had from the housing authority perspective in Brown Ranch? How many total engagements were there? And how many hours? Just because I'm like, it seemed like to me there was a lot. of public engagement.
Mhm.
And so
But nobody showed, I mean,
Well, no, I mean,
lots of
we-
people
I
showed
know
up.
that-
I showed up a
no,
lot.
I
no,
think
but not saying,
Kale distributed, a couple meetings ago, a summary of the community engagement. It was multi-layered to kind of get at the breadth and the depth in the development plan phase. When we moved on to the annexation negotiation, I think there were two, maybe three, forums that were co-hosted by the city and YBHA, where technical experts, I think mostly on the city staff, I remember definitely a Public Works one, talked through some of the major issues. We just didn't do as much. And there were, there were reasons why that happened. Like there were some real constraints there, but, anyway, we did engage a lot. I will say though, that something that's really challenging in this community, and perhaps this is the universal challenge, is that a lot of people, because they're very busy with their own lives, just simply don't pay attention until something is real and before them.
Right.
And then that creates a lot of frustration where people feel like, I didn't get a chance to weigh in. And the reality is, well, you did, but you may not have known about it, or it just didn't feel important at the time because it was so conceptual. And so I would love to hear from you, Kale and Clark, like, how do you navigate that challenge of making sure that people engage at the right time so that it's meaningful and it can be impactful, rather than setting up a process where, people just start paying attention kind of like toward the end and feels like it's too late.
So this is a universal challenge. It's not unique to Steamboat at all. I think this is where some of those belonging Colorado dollars come in, because overall, and this is where you're feeling the effects of national polarization as well, right? We are more reticent to get involved in things because we are more afraid of shouting matches. And there is a trend in Steamboat that your social media reflects that type of conversation versus many of the conversations that we were able to have during the last phase. And so there's this piece of what do we need to actually advance this policy, but what do we also need to do to strengthen our local civic culture so that it can, so you have more local civic strength separate from national politics in some ways. And that goes back to the things that are common ground that Steamboat residents talk about value about living here. And those are pieces I think that can feel like fluff in this process. But what can happen is you end up just having, if you don't find solutions that actually have common ground support, you're going to swing between two extremes. And what we discovered during that first phase is that I don't think that this vote is as simple as conservative and progressive by any means. And it would be an oversimplification to say that you're just Dem versus Republican votes on this. There were many people who support affordable housing, but had big concerns about the nature of the plan, right? And so I think there's pieces of community engagement to get beyond that piece. And some of that is like making community engagement fun, not making it look like the sort of town hall setup where I'm expecting 3 minutes at the mic and to hear a shouting match, right? But that takes some creativity and some risk taking on like a different version of community engagement that makes it into something that feels fun in a different way. That makes people aren't going to be scolded into participating at this point. Civic duty is not resonating with people. We have to make it something that feels engaging and like I feel like I'm connected to my community by being a part of it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate the way you framed that, and I think that was a great question. But Kale, I think the way that you kind of framed civic engagement right now is really important for all of us to understand, and the way that you framed community engagement being fun, and the way that right now it does seem very divisive. And I think an important piece to that part of civic engagement is the way that this group conducts itself. And what I mean by that is if, you know, we have our like shared goals and our values are the way we're gonna operate that we agree to every time we meet, but if this group or city council or the commissioners are modeling behavior that is really divisive in a shouting match manner, then we make it acceptable for our community members to mimic that behavior. And I think what's really important is that we model that civic discourse at a high standard where it's okay if we all don't agree, but how we disagree matters and the way we come to consensus matters. And I know that not everyone in this room has the same like political beliefs as I do, or vice versa, or we might have voted differently on different local elections or national elections, but the way that this group models collaboration and consensus, I think allows or is an example for the way our community is going to do that when it comes to these outreaches. And so I think, one, I appreciate the dialogue that this group has had through your facilitation, because I think that's an important piece. And I was not elected when that vote happened. I was just involved as a citizen, but it was telling to watch how the elected officials engaged at that time. And it was a shouting match often. And so it made it acceptable for our community members to do that as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, it was not the community engagement effort that failed the vote. I think actually you guys did a good job of
Yeah, I agree.
engagement. We did a lot of community engagement. It was the relationship between the city and the housing authority. It was the plan itself in terms of its magnitude and the cost and some unknown factors. So I don't think we should get too hung up on saying, well, we did it wrong from a community engagement standpoint. Last time we had to completely change it. I think, and Helco's point, we're already on a better path by sitting around this table talking and collaborating as a group and demonstrating that collaborative behavior. Community will pick up on that.
Shannon, and then I think I saw Jane, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like the perspective I offer for this group, and I'm the only one in this room that has ever lived in YBHA housing ever, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong if anyone has. But yeah, like I was living in YBHA housing at the time of the first annexation vote, and I had 3 jobs, so I was like not able to ever go to any sort of like community engagement or town halls, anything like that. And like from the perspective that Angelico's speaking, it was also like so contentious. So I was like, why would I even bother going? Because people are like screaming at each other, and also no one cares what I have to say as like this low level person that has no money and no power, where all these like politicians or like prominent people in the community do have like these really loud voices and just like so out of touch from like my reality. And I would be the person that would live on Brown Ranch in like one of those apartments, one of those condos. So I don't know. I think that I don't know where I was going, but that's it. I'll come back to me.
Okay, deal.
Thank you.
Jay,
Just real quick, I think everybody seems to be in agreement that we want one of each for each 4 of these approaches at the right time in the process. And we want a right-sized process for the right-sized project, like it needs to relate for what we're doing. So I think we can kind of build off that to, move forward with a plan on how to do it. Because that's what I'm hearing here is.
Yeah, ultimately, we hire a consultant. It's not gonna be sharing this, and saying, we need a scope of work that reflects this, in the timeframes that we're talking about, so.
Or we're gonna put together.
To Jay's point, I mean, I tried to take what we talked about yesterday and start thinking at that bottom red line looks at kind of key engagement elements that are, things we talked about. So you can see there's sort of discrete points at which you have different levels of community engagement depending on the situation and need. And to, Tom's point, because the engagement was pretty depthful last time, it reinforces the fact that there's a lot of things you guys can build on. And I think you've already done that to some degree, but I think when it comes time to, for example, look at what's the right range of housing types, what are the building typologies we want to look at, things of that nature, it would make a lot of sense to start with what you guys have already identified in your previous process, because there was already some investment in that. Doesn't mean that's where you stop. It just means it gives you a chance to engage people starting from where they already were. This is an imperfect thing. It's just, a take since yesterday at 5 or whatever, but The point to look at is just that, yeah, is exactly as Jay was saying, like, the reason I suggest put it up is because, yeah, there are points where those engagement elements kind of fold into the workflow.
We expect perfection, Clark.
I know.
Pretty darn good.
This is a great start.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is what we asked for.
Yeah, exactly, right? No, thank you.
I would say on the, if it's okay to comment, the other thing that's happening to build on Kale's comments around like how engagement is changing is it's about 100%. It's about making it fun, and fun isn't always the right word, but people are gonna want to be there. And one of the things that's also got to change is people feeling like they show up. You just said it, and their voice doesn't really matter. And the reality is like most engagement sucks. It really does. And the superficial come in and kind of vote on things that somebody else identified is a very different experience. You know, you walk in, you're like, I took off, you know, I could have gone mountain biking tonight, or I could have gone and taken my dog for a walk, or I could have stayed with my kids. But I made the decision to come here and it feels like it's BS. And so people really do need to feel like they're being involved in a way that's substantive. And that takes real effort as well. It might sound again like, oh my God, that's a lot of work and depth. It's not. It's just you have to be strategic and be very clear who you're trying to reach. Related to that, one of the question was asked, how do we know who we reach? I mean, when you do this stuff well, you build a data system to identify reach. You set targets for who you need to reach in the community. Do we want to be demographically representative? How many people do we want to reach? And in general, we set those targets with like a group like this. We'll be like, how many people, you know, we've been doing the comprehensive plan for Lake County and Leadville. And we're like, how many touches do you guys want to get? Their first one was, we want to reach 5,000 people. We're like, well, that's like a lot. That's pretty much everybody. You know, they came down. But then what we do is along the way, we can check in with those systems and be like, well, you've reached this many people of these different demographics, these age, you know, levels. And then what you can do is say, wow, we're really not reaching the Latino, we were in that community, we really having a hard time reaching the Latino community. So we set up a new kind of internal approach to that, partnering with some local organizations there, like boosted it really quickly because you have that back-end data. And if you don't have a system behind your approach, it's really hard to be strategic and targeted in it. So that's the other thing that I think in terms of how we can respond to the environment that's changing right now around engagement, those are some things. And the cool thing is when you do that well, you can change the culture of engagement and people can come in. I got to go back down to Silverton, which was a place where we got, you know, when you guys reached out to us, I think it was because you saw the work we did in Silverton. I was down there to help facilitate this like day-long workshop recently, economic workshop. And man, all day they just talked about like the things they've gotten done and the way that their civic culture has changed. And I mean, you know, to go from making national news because everybody hates each other that much and you have Fox there like doing news stories on the conflict to what was happening in that room was mind-blowing. And that didn't all, you know, that just came down to a lot of commitment from them as a community, like, let's change the civic culture. And they used the process that we were involved with them on to do that, but it stayed. I'm not saying you have to do that here. I'm saying every time you engage your community, it's an opportunity to do more than just the transactional side of, you know, let's get input on this particular question and instead tell people like, we do care, we want to do this better. And they're, you know, it will change. Hopefully somebody like use experience so that next time you're like, I totally would go to do that because last time was an amazing experience.
I would say to accomplish that, it's got to be adequately resourced.
100%. Yeah.
And the commitment.
Yeah. But that's more important. The resources you can find, it's more like big green.
So what I want to do at this point is, I think, Clark, you teed this up nicely as a potential synthesis of the things we've been talking about. I want to do a temperature check vote to look at this and see how close it is. Based on that, may support with a little bit more discussion here to help clarify things. But then, Clark and I are gonna exit the room and have you all talk about fit for contractors moving forward as you've identified different gaps. And whether or not at this stage, just with full transparency of like, you've heard a little bit about what it would mean to work with us moving forward on this. Does that feel like you want to go forward, or do we leave you here with, you've got a roadmap and you've got some priorities to figure out who you want to work with next? So first things first, we're gonna do folks need a minute to just kind of review this in full before taking a temperature check?
Sure.
Just.
Okay, give me a thumbs up when you're ready.
And I guess, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So then, to the extent that the documents that were sent to us, and, you know, particularly that's, the document that had kind of the trade-offs, in terms of, you know, the goals, is that kind of what's contemplated in terms of the scenario planning? Where you know, you do something like that, did everybody get a chance to look at that?
Oh, the stuff that I sent?
Yeah, the document that said, you know, okay, we go
Yeah.
forward with, you know.
All of that's basically, all that content is this space right here. And it actually overlaps, like there's iteration, and I think I'd update this to sort of show the points where there's some connection. Because if you read the market analysis side of that, it creates an opening for talking about some of the housing choices that you'll then explore in the scenario. So there's iteration between those two. Yeah.
Right, so we can put water, right, as kind of one of those categories.
Yeah.
So if we go with, you know, 250 single family homes from Fading West, right? Versus throw in a few townhomes, throw in a few apartments. This is what it is from a cost perspective, but also from a water usage perspective. Thank you.
The dates on the red community engagement thing.
Yeah,
aligned with
no, it's supposed to be, yeah, unfortunately, like it didn't line up well. So the idea is that I think you'd be getting into strategy. I'm not sure how I messed that up, but you know, it's close, but a little off. My point is trying to think about a fairly aggressive schedule so that you can have, you want to be in a place where if you wanted to go to the ballot in 27, you have everything you need for that. By, I would think, late spring. And then a final plan, basically kind of right up to the edge, basically, because I think you'll be, developing a final plan depending on the scale. It'll take some time. And so the idea was the strategies would really come out of the assessment stuff, the needs, constraints, opportunities, and then feed in. And so unfortunately, yeah, these should be shifted that way. Yeah.
The dates.
My apologies. And that's what I meant when I was like, there's some details that are a little need fixing, but just trying to get it out.
Emily, knowing what EHA's capacity, do you think this timeline is feasible?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a push, but I'm happy to see that some of the heavy duty stuff happens more in October. Yes.
I think with the system stuff, right?
Yep.
Additional resources. Talked about like an owner's rep or a budget manager or something, I think.
Yeah,
To me, that's probably key to achieving this.
I'm not sure exactly what the additional assistance will be, but yes,
Right.
absolutely with quite a bit of additional assistance.
And you feel like the decision-making process that's in place now at the interim and Elliott, that you can get the answers you need?
You mean just within?
And staff resources, yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna work through that internally, it's just workload and shifting.
I think also like Emily's point of like, hopefully October we'll have our capacity, like that is hopefully our timeline for hiring an executive director follows that path. We are definitely charging ahead and on schedule from what we wanted to do when we started the process, so.
So Clark, just a quick question as we look at this. What's the point where you need to have a development partner on there in terms of this?
That's actually a good thing to add.
Because that seems to be what's missing in this flow chart or this schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually an interesting thing to ask your development advisory committee, because you could work in an arrangement where you'd want a development partner to actually be hand in hand with you guys during a lot of like the process. Or you could get to a place where you have a final plan and then say, or at least you have the makeups of a final plan. And in the process of doing that, you're like, we're going to shop this to a development partner. So I think that's a thing we want to figure out. If you guys know the answer to that, like today, we can put it anywhere in here. Essentially though, to be clear, it would either be sort of putting it in kind of this space, where we're right when we're getting into the scenarios work, so that they can inform that and partner in it. But you may not want that. You may not want them in there. And in the other hand, it would come right after the scenarios work is done, but with enough time that they can at least give some input on the finalization of the plan. So you don't. Does that make sense? I mean, you probably know as well. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's an important discussion.
Piece to add in.
Look at this schedule, because as Clark mentioned, it's kind of the one thing we have called out in here.
Well, and it might be development partners.
Yes, that's the other point. It could be a master developer, it could be developer partners.
I think it'd be a great idea. The holiday neighborhood in Boulder worked out so well with multiple development partners, and broke it up and, well.
How much kind of room is there for this to move, right? I mean, so this assumes, right, that we don't have any sort of gap that we continue, right? Starting in terms of June, July, forming our advisory teams, et cetera.
It's pretty aggressive in that sense, because there is just a lot of, we've all seen, like, it just takes time to get things done.
Right.
We had to, work hard to find a date that we could have these final meetings, right? And this is easy stuff, relatively. So, and I think some of it too will depend, process wise. If you guys know who you want, regardless of whether you guys work with us, if you do decide to go down the scenario planning route, I just don't know anybody who's doing this the way that Cascadia is. So I'd save yourself some time and talk to them about a partnership. Because if you want to go down the route that you've been talking about, I don't know anybody else who's doing that the way they are. And that'll save you time too, because if you're suddenly in an RFP process and then you need 8 weeks for people to respond, and then you need 6 weeks to go through the process of selecting, and then you need to go through contracting, like that alone, these things take time. I think the most significant push is going to be the question of how well we can drive this scenario, the sort of work of finishing out discussions around needs and constraints and opportunities in a way that doesn't feel rushed, feeds into the more generative kind of planning and strategy work that gets into scenario planning, and have enough time to really allow for some evaluative work in there and some time in between to sort of make changes and iterate, and also still get to a place where you can develop a final plan. And I think this maybe depends too, to some degree, on how final a final plan needs to be to get to a place where you're going to a vote. And I had articulated it in our earlier materials as like highly detailed, because frankly, I didn't see you guys going to the ballot that soon. For a little while, it had been more like, we'll wait. But I think if you're going this approach, you have it more of like a clear plan, but maybe like some of the engineering level design and stuff like that I was describing isn't in there yet. And that'll save you guys a lot of time. Is that how you're seeing it too, Tom?
Yeah, totally agree.
All right, just for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and close out clarifying questions and just do a temperature check on this. So go ahead and give me your fist of 5 in 1, 2.
What do we fist of five?
It's a good question.
What do I do?
This is a comprehensive roadmap going forward that also details key milestones in a community engagement. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I want to just, because this is such a monumental decision, we do have consensus here. But I'd love to hear from Dave if there's anything that would raise your number that you would like to see shifted.
I'd just like to, if we're gonna go down the intensive community engagement road, that it looks and feels different than it did the first time. You know. And that there's outreach specifically to who we know the naysayers are, and we bring those folks along as well. I don't know what the benefit is of asking the community about unit mix and this and that. I was like, we have that data, and that data is gonna evolve over the course of the next 2 years. So it's gonna be really hard to implement that at this stage. Those are just like getting to the defend of, if it was my thought process, I would be thinking about doing a simple annexation agreement, and putting it on a ballot this year. And then doing all this planning after we know that the entitlement's in place. But I'm happy to be part of the process and happy to support whatever the decision is made. Hear input.
There's some validity to that, for sure, from a timing perspective. And I would say there's probably a lot of validity to that with respect to getting development partners on board. Because I have to question, and have a developer in the room that may speak to it, but I have some question as to whether a developer or any development partner is gonna like spend a dime on this until they know we're actually gonna annex this property. We haven't annexed it 3 times, so why would the community do it the 4th? Would be sort of my view if I was a developer, and I'm gonna wait because I don't wanna spend any resources until I know the city's actually committed to doing this.
Well, clarify the third time. I mean.
Well, we've tried 3 times. It hasn't gone 3 times.
Right.
Regardless of the
For
reason.
different reasons.
And if you look at even number of elections, right, you're gonna have the voting block of the young people that show up in much bigger representation, much bigger numbers, and they're the stakeholders of, or a lot of stakeholders of this affordable housing. And so, we know that those numbers for sure, we may end up with like in the city, 3,500 people difference in even year elections. The even year elections hold a much higher percentage of younger people that would be more likely to vote for this.
It's also gonna be a very crowded ballot in 27.
So I'm
I
gonna,
guess,
oh,
look, can I just add one more thing, Phil? I hear you. I wanted this annex 2 years ago, so yep, sooner on the ballot, better. Like, is there anyone in this room who feels like they don't want to see it annexed sooner than later? Like, I think we can all agree that, yes, we want to see it annexed as soon as possible, right? But there are real challenges with annexing it, specifically just timeline. Like, we need to get it to the clerk's office in a month, like the language and all of that done, and the negative consequences of the community saying, well, you're ramming this down our throats again, are real.
What does the ballot language say?
I mean, that would be a mix of whatever the number is, and not tying anything. It would be as unspecific as possible to get the entitlements in place.
Yeah, I think you'd have to define what you're annexing.
And what are
The
the
entire part.
what are the consequences of failing again this year? I think those are like real conversations. Sorry, Jake.
Jay had his hand up.
I really think that's a discussion for the city council, and city staff, because there's obviously risks from a policy perspective of annexing a property where it's not completely dialed in. If there's political support to try that, I think that's great. I think it's just a decision on that. It doesn't really change this time frame that much. It just changes the sequencing of how we move forward on just a couple steps here.
Right, I think it's gonna just like the vote moves here, but we're still doing all of this.
Exactly, but it's just, yeah, I think that's a discussion for the city council. There's pros and cons. of bringing in a piece of property where you don't have all the details. I think we discussed that at our very first meeting here.
Yeah, we talked about it.
And, that's, from my perspective, that's something to defer to the city.
Annexing the whole property,
That-
annexing
No, it'd be
neighborhood.
very
Are
limited
we
to.
saying
And I
we're
know-
only gonna do
And I know
200?
that you can like zone the land to a certain way, so that we're not saying, like, you can figure out those things later, so you can use the community, like, we're not, we're putting in this blanket zoning right now, so that we're not saying like, there are ways to mitigate that, as Jay outlined. But I mean, this is down to the wire now, right? Like, this is this group's last meeting, pretty much before we would need to get something to the clerk's office, so I think it's an important conversation, but what I will say is that if Gail and Dave and Tom are gonna take this to city council, which I think Jay is correct, that's ultimately what needs to happen, it's a city's decision. That this group needs to be unified in supporting that, like, this is the recommendation of the Slate Creek Steering Committee to go in 2026 because of these reasons. City council, what do you think?
Clarification question. Do you have to do it in November?
No.
That's what's being
We
proposed.
could do it in the spring, but it would cost more money to run an off-cycle election, and turnout is typically less in off-cycle elections than in a November election. So your November of 2027 election would actually get more people to turn out than a March 2027 election. So in terms of turnout, it would be November 2026, November 2027, or spring 2027.
It's hard to run a campaign in a March.
How does that impact community engagement or no community engagement?
It's significantly,
There are
based upon the last March
significant
election.
more resources available to get people to turn out to vote in November elections. Significantly more resources because people are already campaigning and doing things that you can just tack that on to what other people are doing.
Don't answer no, we can't get the front doors in March. This year we could have.
In shorts and a t-shirt, yeah.
Right, but typically, in terms of any sort of grassroots outreach campaign, it's really difficult to run in March.
Tom,
And I appreciate you entertaining it. I'm not saying it's the right way to go, but I mean,
There are advantages.
if it's loose and it gives us the flexibility, I honestly don't think the resistance is there. I know I know that the adverse can be there as well, right? Coming out against affordable housing is not a popular thing. And I think that was one of the things that happened in the vote, right? I think there was a lot of confidence that Brown Ranch was gonna pass the first time, but there was a lot of quiet no's that didn't understand it. And I think that a mix of whatever we had define as 250 single family homes or apartments or whatever that language is on the ballot would be palatable to the community, understanding the crisis that we talk about every day, all the time. And I think that would be and the commercial component being a community benefit as well.
I'm gonna go to Emily next.
My question was for you, Tom. What would you see being the elements of an annexation agreement in this scenario?
I mean, if you did it, it'd be pretty basic. We would define the boundaries of the annexation, which wouldn't be all that difficult. It would not be the entire property. It would be enough to accommodate the boundaries of what was neighborhood A. We would define probably, the zoning, which would probably be some sort of holding zone without any kind of development, associated with it. And then the range of uses that would be in it.
So what I'm gonna have us do at this point is that just articulated a little bit of what it would look like to do annexation agreement first. I'm gonna have us think through, it sounds like if we did that, the preferable option is a November 2026. And then there would be elements of planning that happen after an annexation agreement. I want to test out both of these pathways forward to see where the group has stronger agreement going forward. So go ahead and give me your fist of 5 on rearranging things so we go for an annexation agreement first that's more open-ended, and then planning can happen afterwards.
I just want to ask a question. Do you guys feel like you have enough information to handle that now, or maybe we can find out where you are with that. I know, I don't,
I don't think we have time.
yeah.
Well, here's, can I ask a question? I mean, what do you, I got a bit in my stomach. So.
Keep going.
Help me work through like what you think the risks are going. I mean, I absolutely Ray concur. I mean, I would love to see something pass in November. What are the risks of it not passing?
But I think the biggest risk was somebody mentioned that, the opposition would say, you're just trying to cram something down my throat. But I don't know how big that risk is. Like, I would actually trust Dave's perspective more than I trust mine. I think the positives are also there, bringing a developer partner on time, well, you know, at that time. It has significant advantages in terms of resources available to get the rest of the project moving forward quickly.
But just think about it from broadly, from a community trust perspective, right?
You'll get a lot of people that'll say, I don't know what I'm voting.
You're right.
And when you do that
You will road trust.
and they vote no,
I mean, yes, but you may also get a lot of people that are like, about time they're doing something, we just need something.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I think having specific language that limits what can be done. And the knowledge that anything future to do with, it's like Creek Ranch, Brown Ranch, has to come back.
What do you mean by has to come back?
Has to come back to the public.
Other than the initial annexation and doing.
It wouldn't, any development on that annexation though wouldn't come back to the public.
No, that's what I mean. The only annexation that we'd be defining is for the.
Oh, you're saying a future
Yeah,
annexation.
yes.
Agreed, thank you. I thought you were saying that we'll annex it and then we'll say whatever we build will come back to the public. Okay, thank you.
Well, what gets built is gonna have to go through a planning process,
Yeah, let's go through each
you know, so it's public.
That was one question I had is, to what degree does one actually get you to like something going vertical sooner or not? Like, is it clear that at the end of the day, you still need to do the work? It seems like, I think what I'm trying to do is help think about, do whatever makes sense. I think definitely do the thing that gives you the best chance of success and getting the most benefit on your investment. It's an ROI question here. But the community's investment really, and the investment that YPJ has in this land, which is significant. Seems like isolating out the like critical strategic benefits would be valuable. Because it would be easy to sort of, and it sounds like one of those might be the ability to collaborate in a different way with a development partner. And it would be interesting to evaluate whether it actually moves forward anything at the property sooner or not, because it might not. Another question, it seems to be that we're hearing relates a little bit more like how the community will experience this question, which we all want to be careful, like none of us really know, but we can sort of try to surmise as best as possible. I'm trying to think what other things are sort of the clear distinguishing differences, because I guess my point is making sure that if it's to move faster, that may or may not actually be the case. If it's to enable a different approach to working with a development partner, maybe, and if it creates a clearer political path, that people just feel like actually we feel like we'll have more success this fall with less clarity but clear parameters than something else, then that might be a real strategic advantage. But just understanding like the strategic differences between them that you actually know could help you as you look at this.
Dave had his hand up and then I'll go to you.
And I would just say, like at our joint meeting last time, Sonia Macy's brought up, what the hell is going on with Slate Creek Steering Committee? And, very public about it. And I think that's probably, she emulates some of the, community frustration that things just haven't been materializing like we'd all hope, where's the consultants, where's the money, where's, what's going on? And I think that frustration is blind. And so I would ask, do you think the other commissioners would like to see this approach, or how do you think that would be?
I think we as commissioners want to have a very defined line of we're not here to tell the city what to do. Like we really try and let the city govern the city decisions. And yes, we want to be your partner in this, but it might be an overstep for us to say, city council, you need to put this on the ballot, but I think personally as commissioners, we are very supportive of this moving forward. In one, an efficient way, but two, in the way that will be most successful and beneficial to the community. And if this group and city council says that going in 2026 is the best option for that, then I think commissioners would be in generally supportive of that. Obviously, I haven't spoken to them, but I think, we want to see something happen. We've been very clear. We want to see something move forward. We want to support YBHA in every way that we can. And so if this is what the group comes back to, and I relay that to the commissioners, I think that they would be supportive. I think they have questions, but I think they would be supportive of it going if that's what this group decided and if YBHA and the city were on board. Jay?
Well, Lou was in line and then we'll go to Jay.
Okay, from a very pragmatic standpoint. As a developer partner faster, bringing a developer partner on faster resolves, it may not speed it up, but it probably would speed it up, but not, I can't tell you how much, but it would make it much more efficient. Especially if we're talking about, well, what needs to be constructed and how it needs to be constructed, where it needs to be constructed, what information is required, what's, the very resource intense activities now become shifted.
And you would get developers that wanted to be part of the project that was in touch.
Yes. So I think that's from a very pragmatic standpoint.
Jay?
I just want to mention, I mean, I think the county's role, if we move forward with this accelerated annexation plan or timeframe, for lack of a better term, is that the city would be providing us an impact report and the commissioners would accept it. It doesn't really do a lot if we don't accept it, but it's just how the statutes written on annexations. And I think we could work with the city in a proactive manner. There's a lot of latitude to what gets included in that. It's like 6 items, but I've done reports which were like 3 sentences for each item, and I've done them where they're, huge. And I think we could work well with the city to come up with the appropriate items which should be covered in that annexation report, which also gives another check in public process. That's all I want.
Like a fully formed opinion on which direction we want to move the annexation move. I would want us to reach a consensus on why we're choosing one over the other, whether it's to like entice developers to come on earlier and that may or may not like speed up the process, or we want to wait because community engagement is like our number one priority. So I'm being pulled in like multiple directions where like I'm trying to think like if I were a voter, would I feel like, oh, I want to vote yes on this annexation this November so we can actually move forward? Or would I say like, oh, it's only going to be like 200 units that doesn't solve anything for our community? Like, what's the point of even doing this? Like, they aren't doing anything again. So I can like see it both ways, but I think we need to clearly define like why we're choosing one or the other. And I feel like that would help me at least decide which I think is better.
Yeah, Gail?
I mean, and I think, and the ultimate, one of the questions I had is what if it fails? Then are we done?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What if it fails?
5th time's the charm.
It says it's kind
No, does it?
of.
Well, no, are we done?
Why would we be done?
I agree.
We've got like the properties still by the housing.
Right, I don't think
Well,
we'd
also,
be
yeah,
done.
like if it fails, how many times? Like, are we just gonna keep doing this to fail again and again and again? And like, what is the public perception of that? So, yeah, I hear that.
And then I think again, and then back to the capacity and the resources to actually pull this off. Would be my secondary question.
Is that gonna change the way the year? I mean, you might,
Yeah,
it would.
should we have the capacity to put an annexation agreement in place between now before we go to the ballot?
Oh, you mean staff capacity.
Yeah.
Well, and to me, I mean, there are some very real benefits here. One being that a subdivision and development plan process is straightforward. There's a rule book and you follow it. There's a process. Annexation is so much more nebulous. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it creates certainty where there has been very little certainty for years. It's high risk in terms of it failing because of too little information. My concern within this group is that we might have different expectations about what would be in the annexation agreement. because this is coming up right now. And I would hate for us to go down this path and then get to a place where we're like, wait, you're saying 250 units. I'm saying something different. And then we're like back to following that.
Yeah,
Maybe we lose a month, I don't know, but,
Well, I think, it's gonna be a maximum.
okay.
That's what I'm saying.
400,
Up to,
400, whatever you want.
yes.
we would need a water demand report.
Yeah.
We need to figure out the vesting term. Like, I'm just trying to think of like, what are the key elements that we would have in, and do we think that we actually have agreement in here or not? I just want to make sure that we don't have different expectations.
So I think that gets to the point, Dave's used the term entitlements. I think if we do an annexation or push it forward in an early timeframe, the city embraces that. We need to clearly define what those entitlements are, because there's a whole series of additional entitlements which will be needed to be put in place before the project happens. So this gets you a third of the way there on the entitlement way, but it also, it doesn't prohibit, the initiative process down the line, which can be an ordinance that the city passes, which means that if the public doesn't like what we come up with a plan, even after the annexation, they can get another bite of the apple. It's just a different process to get there. I've worked on projects where the property was annexed, and when we came forward with the project, the community put initiative together twice and overturned the approval for the annexation. I mean, not for the annexation, for the development plan. Then we finally got one which the community would accept, but the annexation was just an early step in that process. So
I think,
it doesn't give you certainty to the end goal, but it gives you a step forward.
It's rated for sure. It's
Yes.
not doing it.
I think that there's real, sorry, if you want to move us on, you can move us on, or I can be really quick.
Go ahead, and I want to see if we want to, phone a friend and see if there's anybody who's an observer here who'd like to weigh in.
I'll just say that I think that on point, there's real risk reward to this. But my personal opinion is that 2026 is the year to go. Like I've thought that for a long time already. Like we're gonna get the most voter turnout, like whether we were there or not, I'm not sure.
It could totally be your idea.
Might be good for us to team up. You would love that. No, but I was actually getting there. I'm like, I think, if this group decides that it is the right way to go this year because of all of these pros that we've laid out, but I think it is important that, everyone in this room is supportive of that. Again, we are a unified front, that someone who didn't support the annexation the last round and someone who did are saying this is why this is the best option forward. We're doing that together because I think in a short amount of campaign time, like there's nothing more crucial than that. And so I'll leave it at that.
Do we want to phone a friend?
Why not?
Okay. Would you be open to sharing your perspective? And will you just introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Ryan Stone, I'm the managing partner for East West Partners here in Steamboat, development company based in Steamboat. There's a few things to unpack here. I guess I'll start with my opinion on the annexation vote. One of the things I heard you guys discuss, and I didn't hear any consensus on, was what exactly are the constraints you're working under? I heard Tom talk about like there's water constraints, power, whatever the constraints are. I think what you'd be doing by putting forth an annexation vote in 2026 is coming to consensus on what are the constraints that you're working within right now. Like, and I feel like that was one of the major contention points last time around was nobody agreed on what the constraints were. So I think that would be beneficial. As a developer, I mean, I would rather step into a scenario where there was an annexed piece of property with zoning in place that gave me guidelines on what to design, but not a specific plan. Like as a developer, I would be concerned about you're either gonna get a developer that agrees with, if you plan your own project, you're either gonna get a developer that agrees with what you've planned, or developers that say, I can't do what you've planned. It's not economically viable. One of the challenges, either from a development, like bringing a development partner on board, you're either gonna get a development consultant who can give you opinions on what they believe the development community would or wouldn't do? Or do you want a developer who's going to build this project with, those are two different things. If you bring in somebody before it's annexed and zoned, I would say you want a development consultant. If you've got product, if you've got land that's annexed and zoned and you want somebody to move dirt moving forward, that's a developer. I think my personal opinion, that was one of the challenges in the last go round, was Michael's was a developer and he needed a development consultant. I'm happy to answer questions if you guys have questions for me, but
No, I'll just say that I think your point on constraints is something we talked a lot about yesterday. The city does have their constraints analysis already, and so we were all coming in today with like a shared, correct me if I'm wrong, a shared understanding of what those constraints were. You know, the city can absorb 1.5 miles of road, the city can build up to 400 to 500 units, so we kind of do have that already, which is very helpful in guiding us. So
I think that's what you'd be trying to annex in, is you're saying we've established a
Yeah.
fact
Yeah.
that these are the constraints and we won't go beyond these constraints.
correct.
That seemed like the biggest contention point was signing up for a bunch of unknown costs.
Well, and part of this is the constraints are based on no significant expenditures, if that's the accurate, okay? So that,
That's a
yes, we can do this with the existing systems we have.
Right, without additional burden.
And annexing this smaller piece of property also shows that we're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes by annexing the whole property and saying we're only gonna build this.
You're establishing proof of concept.
That's it can be
One
done.
important point from your comments, it feels like it fits either way, gets to the question you had earlier, Lou, around it, like, or maybe it was Jay actually, who asked, like, at what point would a development partner come in? And it sounds like, you know, in either case, prior to sort of finalizing the detailed development plan, you want to bring in somebody, or at least begin engaging in that partnership. And in one case, you're beginning from that. You've decided that partner and you're going in it together. Another one, as you get to a point where you're ready to start finalizing the planning for it, you do that in collaboration with your partner. So.
I know scale and Clark, just one question before, because if we were to do this in 26, what could your role be, or would your role be applicable going forward?
You read my mind because that's what I was gonna pivot to Clark next, but I also want to ask Brad's perspective on how would this change the ability to use remaining belonging Colorado dollars?
My primary concern is the sort of engagement campaign mix gets really hard to suss through. So it feels like I would advise you're shutting down the Belonging Colorado project for the foreseeable future until you could do engagement after the results of the vote. You could then essentially continue this timeline after annexation. But that's the main thing.
The dollars would have to be spent by the end of this year.
Yeah.
So you basically saying you could do something after about in December with those dollars. Were you?
But there is, they had communicated to us that there could be support next year as well for existing project sites. So we would just have to tap into 27 funds, potentially return 2026 funds. That's, minor part of this in the grand scheme of things.
What numbers are?
60 grand.
Yeah, okay.
Real money, but not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious, is what Brad said, does that mean we're not going to do community engagement for this annexation? Or Some-
We would,
some-
it would be different. We wouldn't do the community engagement on unit size and makeup and all of that because that would not be needed for the annexation agreement. Like we keep the annexation agreement simple to Tom and Emily's point, but we would do engagement on getting the vote passed.
Yeah.
Well, to be clear, there's a delineation.
I mean, the.
Once it's on the ballot, it's not engagement, it's campaigning.
Right.
Yeah, but no, pretty quick, no campaign, no lobby, like I can't use the funds for anything that.
And I would say, given the makeup of this group, you guys would not be able to be involved in that.
Allows our candidate.
I mean, we could as individuals.
Individuals, yeah.
Right, but not.
You need to be careful in your role on that group.
And then Clark, can you speak a little bit about like community builders role? What that would look like if this was the pathway forward?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it might be that we're, wrapped up and, we definitely wish you guys the best of luck. And also if there's anything we can do, feels like it would be helpful, we'd certainly entertain that. It's a big shift. And I think it makes sense to look at it. But I don't feel like if we're not needed, like you guys should roll. It's all good. We're about you guys getting where you need to get, not about us. So if there's ways we can help in terms of this group, same thing with you guys, I'm sure. If there's a role where we can add value and you guys want it, we're there. But if this, ends up being a direction you guys decide to go, I would think internally, like my message to my team would be like, yeah, I think our work is wrapping up there. I wouldn't see a big role for us in it other than maybe some sort of wrap up to this. Because I just don't know that we'd be needed other than maybe helping this group a little bit. We can think about what that would be. I don't know. I'd have to reorient sort of what the needs would be based on that. Because we've been really planning and designing around a different model. And so I think we'd have to pivot and rethink.
Yeah, Tom?
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think one thing that we do have to consider is, we talked about, to Clark's point, we have a goal of putting a shovel in the ground and building units, and we want that to occur somewhere out here. Which path gets us there the fastest? I wonder if trying to annex it first will be a bit of a distraction for all this other work. And I do think it will be, because I think we're gonna get hung up in, instead of doing this work, we're gonna have to spend resources doing the annexation agreement. And we're gonna have to spend staff time doing that, and we gotta get the attorneys involved, and this probably will slow down.
I was gonna ask that, everyone's opinion on that. I'm glad you brought it up because I'm not sure we want it to slow down. Maybe it has to, just from a resource limitation standpoint. But the things that need to be done, I think still need to be done. The community engagement on, here's what we're gonna put out there. To further define what is being annexed. And when do you do that? Is it after the annexation? I'm not sure. Maybe it is, I don't know.
We're gonna spend a lot of time explaining to the community
I know.
why we're doing this annexation now, and what does it mean, and what's in it, as opposed to focusing on this stuff. I mean, that's inevitable.
But isn't that some of that community engagement?
Well, it is.
Oh, okay.
But the focus will be different.
The time of it changes, right? Like the time, right, maybe the components all stay the same, but when you do them changes.
And
right?
that's also assuming that timeline doesn't get pushed. For anything on that timeline,
That's right.
so. I mean, we all know timelines are great, but very rarely.
Should we do like a temperature check on how we're feeling 2026 versus 2027 / then talk about community engagement after the results of that?
I think that's where we've got to get to just with the time we've got left. What you've outlined is that there's trade-offs to both approaches. What I've heard so far is ultimately you're thinking about what will make us successful. And the things that I've heard you talk about in terms of what will make you successful is what will produce beneficial developer partnerships, what will provide communities and political support for a win versus the risks of that. Where will you have the capacity and resources to make different options work? Where you need contractor support throughout the process, and where you can get agreement in what timeline from this group on direction moving forward are some of the things I've heard. And both options have pros and cons in either category. So let's go ahead and take a temperature check. Yes,
Just one quick question for Tom. What would be your internal process of working with the council to see whether there's consensus among your group to move forward with a quick annexation? Because I'm almost seeing two parallel paths, that we move forward on this and then see if defer to the city on what their timing issue is, because that's gonna take a full board discussion, and it's, you know,
We may
it's
not
from the
get
4th of July, you might not get the other support, so,
No, we get until the 7th.
yeah, 4th is coming up,
What's the
so
ballot? What's the drop dead for getting something on the ballot?
We have August something.
Oh,
We knew we
got a little time.
To notify.
We're gonna notify the clerk on July.
2 readings before.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just add that the first step in the process would also be the YBHA board agreeing to this, because we would have to submit the petition. And this is not something that we've talked about with them in 2026, so.
I think,
But I do want to hear your question, or your answer to that question of what your process would be. If we were to submit a petition for annexation. Or what, yeah.
I think we all just need to be excited, Nicolas Cage's.
Yes.
Not the bees, not the bees, the excited.
I think if we did that, we would have a lot of bees. The city staff, I will say that. There will be a mad scramble. There's no question. And priorities will have to be, actions will have to be reprioritized. There's no question about it.
And
We'll have to
council,
take things off the agenda and move them, because this is a big discussion at council, so our agendas in July are shot. We'll have to take things off, move them, have these conversations. Because
And our board meeting's the second.
so it would be kind of a mad scramble, and I don't exactly know what that process looks like. We would need to get our attorneys involved, start drafting the annexation agreement, that type of thing, so. I'm not saying it's not possible, I'm just saying it's gonna be disruptive.
yeah, I would say, in order to have we could certainly schedule a council discussion for July 7th. We could probably pull together a special meeting, right? To have this conversation, but I think there needs to be a lot of information that council would need before we can make this decision.
I agree.
So we would need to have to lean into staff, we need, in the YBHA, in terms of, okay.
So what we're really doing is taking a temperature, whether we think the city and YBHA should further explore this option within the next 21 days, basically, while we're still looking at this path.
And can I also ask then, how does the SE squared fit into what goes into the annexation? In terms of the defining it. Do we meet again? Do we do it differently through staff?
Sure, but it's pretty much limited by the constraints analysis, right?
It is. No,
So, we could go to
I
the,
could write it down, but it might not know what everybody says. Never mind.
I think the answer is we're still working down this path. It's just a couple milestones get rearranged
Right.
and Tom Summer gets screened. What's?
Yeah.
And it's kind of rude.
One thing that's worth understanding in the context of constraints is, what you guys are really working with there. You guys identified a much larger sort of suite of things you wanted to work on in terms of understanding technical constraints. You have one from the interim city staff board, which provides really valuable definition. But I think from a YPHA board perspective, there would be an interesting dialogue, I would imagine, your board around are we in the, there's some potential expediency here, but also are we potentially leaving things on the table? In terms of what's possible, if it's sort of towards something that feels smaller for you guys than what you're anticipating, recognizing that the board, I don't know that your board, I don't know, have you guys sort of landed on a place where there's a sort of a unit count expectation? I know there's been unit counts thrown around, but I am always assuming that those are sort of people's ideas, and then eventually you guys are gonna actually sort that out through the process.
Well, yeah, I think we need to actually go through the economics to figure out what it would be. But so no,
we haven't done it on.
The board understood, YBG board understood the city's constraints analysis and like,
Yes.
but you know, Emily's correct. We haven't like landed on it. We'd like to see this much because it makes sense. Economically, this, yeah, we haven't done that.
The annexation would always just reference up to 400 EQRs or whatever we all decided was gonna be that number. And the EQRs could be used to take commercial out of those EQRs and limit the amount of housing or vice versa.
Anybody online that wants to make it up? I don't know if we have.
I'm gonna push us towards a temperature
Okay.
check vote,
Okay.
just because of time. And I know this is difficult, because there's lots of loose ends here of what would happen. Ultimately, to move, for you all to have any chance of making November work, you gotta make a decision today, I think. So I wanna go ahead and I'm gonna take two votes, just to do a comparison. First one is going to be basically what Jay has proposed. We put this forth to City Council and YBHA Board to determine if there is a possible path forward to getting it on the ballot for November of this year. While also anticipating that we work towards the roadmap if that doesn't go forward. Okay, second option is that's too tight a timeline. We're just going to focus on the roadmap with an end goal of November 27th. 27. Okay. All right, so first option, November 26th. Go ahead and give me your fist to 5. Okay, second option, going forward to November 27th. Okay, so overall you have consensus. You have consensus for November 27. You don't have consensus for November 26. Want to maybe open it up to 2 votes to just talk through your thinking on this.
Like, I'm honestly, it's like I'm a 5 and also a 1. Yeah.
The party was like, let's go.
Yes, this, I mean, right, realistically, that is what I would like us to do. I also am very concerned about just logistics, like even in terms of us being able to communicate what we're doing and why, so that an outside group can build a campaign to successfully get this passed. Feels like a very tall order in the next 6 weeks, because the reality is, at least based on experience last time, as soon as there's ballot language that's published, like, we can't talk about it. And that is gonna be really difficult for some outside group campaigning to be able to understand the decision that was made quickly and why. And I worry about it being perceived as sloppy and that ultimately setting us back further. That's my concern. That said, I would really like to have a simple annexation and have it happen in 2026. So I'm really torn.
Shannon?
Yeah, I feel pretty similar to Emily. I'm thinking about it from like a community engagement, community perspective. And yeah, I feel like it can come off as like rushed or like not thought out. And I can see like, yeah, I don't know, it just feels too soon and too rushed. And I can't get fully on board with it.
And just adding on to that, and again, my experience is absolutely based on the prior experience and the fact that there was a lot of opportunity for outreach and the fact that, I'll say it once, that, you know, when you don't have a thorough campaign and when you don't have the ability to have the discussions within the community, you leave a lot of space for a lot of misinformation. And so from a logistics perspective, staff perspective, how we pull this off, I think, because I absolutely would love to bring this to a vote in November. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think that there would probably be success, but I worry about the risk and worry and think about it from the logistical standpoint. I don't know who would step forward to even bring this as a campaign, right? I mean, in the sense of your housing advocates are gonna say, I don't know, right? It's like, okay, we're gonna get something, right? Or we're only gonna get 250 homes, or there's, right, no, You know, it is, or not, right? And then, you know, and again, just to the point of how do we explain and justify why we're moving forward with this? Because we think it increases our success ultimately.
Because crisis calls for bold decisions at bold times. And I mean, the focus of Slate Creek was to put shovels in the ground and build affordable housing. Just trying to get it across the finish line. And I think if we go through this whole process again, a lot of the community is gonna be tired of the whole process
Are
again.
you gonna be knocking on doors with me?
I'd be stumbling for it, you know, for
Well-
sure. I would work as hard to get it passed as I work to get Brown Ridge defeated.
I think, I was on it too, so you can tell me to be quiet if you want.
Okay.
But,
Get me there, because
I don't,
I'd love to see this.
I can't speak to staff capacity, so I really appreciate Tom's perspective and Emily's perspective on like logistics. But I don't see the harm in taking it to council and vetting this thoroughly. Going back to the YBHA board, going back to the full city council and vetting this thoroughly and still understanding, yeah, we like this roadmap, but potentially you could have all 5 other city council members be like, that's a great idea, you know, and here's why. I don't know if that's the case or not. But I think that I don't see the harm in doing that. And then if you go back to city council in July and they're like, absolutely not, this is not the way we want to go, then at least we've explored that option. But I think it's doing a disservice to not explore that option on one hand. And I think that there is real value, the developers I have talked to, and I do appreciate your comments today, they are more likely to join, to buy into a project on a piece of land that is already annexed. Like, I think that is fact. We know that, like, there are a lot of pros to going in November of 2026. And if it's just logistics and reprioritization and, you know, then I think we owe it to our community and to our constituents to potentially reprioritize. We know when we did have our joint city council commissioner meeting, every single person on that dais said that they wanted to see something happen and see something happen sooner than later. And so there was that consensus then, and that was pretty clear from, you know, every single person was like, we want to see something happen. And so I think we owe it to bring this conversation back to them and say, hey, the steering committee is seriously evaluating this because of these reasons, and see what the larger group says. So, and that's why I voted a 3, because I'm not saying that, it's a shoo-in for a win. I think there are real obstacles that have been identified here, but I think it's doing a disservice to our constituents to not take that to our larger boards and councils.
So real quick, who has a hard stop at 12?
Nice.
Okay. Oh, how much extra time do we have? Who has the next hard stop?
I have a 2:30 and a meeting at 1.
2:30 for Gail? Okay.
So you're like maybe half hour max.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what the donuts are for.
I have no problem. Okay, we're gonna lose, and then Dave.
I heard 2 concerns. One was the logistics, and I agree entirely what you said about that. The other was the risk and risk of failure. I think that exact same risk stays with us forever. That's the same risk now as it is at the end of this process. It's the same need to explain what it is we're actually doing and why. So I see that as the same risk, or the same level of risk. Maybe not necessarily the exact same risk, same level of risk. So I'm less concerned about that, especially when, you know, the one person who is on the opposition group is, you know, in favor of this.
That's actually your idea, so it worked for me.
This was, I would say he's a voice from one of the.
I was just.
No, it is, there are elements, the no growth people will not want this at all, but I can also tell you, the units we're talking about are no growth. They represent about 1,200 people, and those are people that number came from the city, as people who already live and work inside the city and would just move to Slate Creek.
I think it's possible there's a population of people too that think that this is too small. I only voted for the other one because it was large and actually addressed the problem. So I think that is a possibility also. So I don't think it's just like that 11% or whatever that we're talking about, it's possible that that population does change. Sorry.
Dave?
I'd speak to that and I'd say that's an easy one to defeat because you either want affordable housing or you don't. To say that the development's not big enough, really wouldn't resonate. I mean, doesn't resonate to me or in any kind of like argument. I would say though, if we do bring it to city council, real quick, um, from folks and it'd be worthwhile to even engage the pilot to be like, hey, listen, you want to be here for this meeting. We're going to talk about something, really important. So we get that temperature check and maybe we say, whoa, okay, that was we were way off based on that. We're going back to the original timeline and you know that pretty quick. And, I don't know if we have a special meeting on the 2nd or whether we've already given everybody that day off.
So much for your vacation, Tom.
Oh, you're gonna be me.
I would go to a 3. I certainly, would be willing to, pursue this from the perspective of giving us the opportunity to more fully vet this and get more input. Knowing that, there is a cost to that from a resource perspective, and I would disagree with you a bit in terms of your community engagement and the risk of failure from the perspective of the risk of failure is greater from my perspective when you crunch this in between now and November versus having the opportunity to fully vet a pet plan, have an engagement strategy where we actually have those conversations, we get that buy-in. I feel like our level or ability to succeed in terms of what's up here is higher than if we move forward in November. But I'm willing to entertain. I'm willing to move to a 3.
There's 1,100 voters between 18 and 44 that vote on even year elections that don't vote on odd year elections.
I'll address Shannon's comment. When we're talking about, we're talking, I know somehow 250 seems to be a number that comes up, but it's somewhere in my mind between 200 and 500 units. That's it. That's what it is. Whether it's 400 or 350, I'm not sure that matters. Because if you're talking about 2,200 units, what that brings into the equation is this once again becomes a $1.5 to $2 billion program. In today's economic environment, I'm not sure how that gets sold ever.
Oh, I'm not saying to market it. I'm just saying that's a possible population of voters. I don't know.
No, but I think the number is going to be much larger now. Okay, just because of the environment today. That was 3 years ago. Nothing is the same price as it was then. So that to me is that's a huge hurdle. So the size, I think for us through 2027, 2029, when we would actually have, we would want something to be functional, is that number, that small range. Then we have to talk about a second annexation possible. Yeah, you'd say, okay, now we think we need more land, we think we need more units. I don't know if that will get to that point, but it's in the future and it's not prohibited. My concern is if we go up with a large number, it's automatically prohibited.
I'm not saying that's what we should do. I was just saying that's.
No, part of this is, should we go to city council or should city council or you guys go to city council and vote on this? That's the decision.
Do you guys mind if I weigh in for 1 second?
Don't mind, sorry.
You can mind if you.
Would love to hear.
I'm not sure you guys are talking about the right to options. I think what I'm hearing in the room is there is a consensus that getting to an annexation before you go through all of this is a positive that people would support. Sort of take the timing off the table, like to say, it would have, the only way to do the annexation first is if we did it in 2026. If that were not part of the constraint that you guys were voting on, would that change your vote? It feels to me like what I'm hearing in the room is that moving towards an annexation is the appropriate right step. You might have to do some of this stuff, some of the community outreach, some of that engagement, but I'm not sure the goal is to develop a plan for Slate Creek, but the goal is to annex an appropriate size piece for Slate Creek to be developed. And the other thing I would add in here, and the council members in the room can shoot me if you want to, but I don't think this has to go to a vote. I know probably you've all promised that it wouldn't get approved without a vote, but it does not have to.
That I'm spoken promise.
Yeah, so I'm just throwing that out there. That if you could get support to not take it to a vote.
I think it's a good point. I mean, that's why I asked about a March timeframe for a special election. I know it's more expensive. I know fewer people show up. But, you know, if you got the difference between getting a lot of people to show up or what Ryan suggested, nobody shows up because council votes on it. That's a pretty big spread. So I don't know the answer, but he's right. Do we have to have this November deadline? If that creates angst associated with community engagement and anything else.
Dave?
I would just say too, if you think about the timing too, where YBHA is with a new ED coming in and sort of the public relations campaign that needs to happen just with YBHA and the mill levy and those things, I think this could bring a lot of credibility back to YBHA, as well as through the city and county taking action, but also putting YBHA back on more trusted path with the community, just by saying, we heard you, we listened, we're doing a smaller development, we're biting this, we're taking one small bite of this, this problem, and we're gonna move forward with this. And, so it could be good timing in that sense also from a public relations standpoint. Because, you do have a case that you have to make for the mill levy and the renewal and getting back. And so you'd be creating something and putting something back in your pipeline as well.
And Helga?
I was just thinking if if this was coming to like the commissioners to like put to a vote, or if this was, I was the decision maker, like city council is, I think I would probably advise Jay to put it on an agenda. Like I would say, let's put it on an agenda, let's post it, let's share it, and let's get community members to show up. Obviously, we will tell the narrative, like I would say, we would share the narrative, we want to do a small one. We want to have these very strict limitations in place up to this. We want to take the constraint analysis, but we think that this is the best path forward, and then see who shows up. Because I was just thinking through, like, if I was Gail, or if this was coming to the county for annexation instead of the city, my directive to staff as a commissioner would be put it on an agenda. Like, we want to hear from the community. Let's give them the opportunity to weigh in. You might get the people who led the, Citizens for a Better Plan campaign to show up and be like, not a bad plan. Cool. Or you might get them to show up and be like, really not liking this. You might get people who support, you know what I mean? But I keep going back to the fact that it's a disservice to only have the discussion in this room. And, we don't know what we don't know, but by putting it on the agenda, it gives an opportunity for the community to participate in a way that gives us more information, and to the point where it might be a slam dunk. You might hear from so many people in that meeting who are like, we like this, or it might not be, but like, I think that would be my directive. If this was coming to the county, I would direct staff to put it on the agenda, and let's go from there.
Want to open it up to any of the folks who were twos to see how this conversation is landing with you.
I've moved to a 3. My only concern is, would this push back the timeline and ultimately make it take longer to get to the completion of the project? I'm not sure. But I am willing to have a conversation with the board.
I'm also a 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think though, we don't just leave this room, right? I mean, in the sense of there's some things that then have to happen before our July city council meeting, right? From a community engagement perspective, right? Maybe non-engagement, community informed, right? That, we're, as the steering committee, considering this as an alternative, and we absolutely want your input, send us emails, right? Send us Board of County Commissioners, YBHA, obviously we have to alert our council members, like immediately within 24 hours, right? That if we're gonna do something, we don't want them, to be surprised, right? I would assume you want to do that same thing with the board. Right? There's a process, right, that has to be followed, right? We can't just.
Been made, but we're vetting.
Yeah, no, exactly that. So we want to use this time period. As I say, I hear what you're saying and I absolutely agree. That's why, my initial reaction is we need to have more time and we need to have more input in terms of this decision. We also need to have the ability to understand truly what are the trade-offs and are those worth it? But we need to set ourselves up for success so that I'm thinking about we've got some development plan proposals on the July 7th, but are we gonna call them and say, sorry, you gotta, we're not gonna hear those now? Because this is gonna be a full-blown council meeting. I'm getting hung up in the logistics.
Well, I think actually, so I tried to just graphic out the basic logistics for you guys. It's not enough, but it does get at the point that where, how things move, trying to reflect what you guys have said. One of the things that's challenging, just as an observer, I can feel your challenges. It's not challenging for me, but it goes back to a comment earlier, which is just not having enough information to really decide right now. And also, I think having spent time exploring some different things you guys wanted to potentially try in the other process, which didn't necessarily include, but a singular development partner, but actually potentially included working with a variety of different partnerships, including potentially existing institutions locally that were frustrated last time. They wanted more opportunity to be involved in the development last time. So those are, I use that as an example of things where it's tricky because there's sort of an accelerated timeline that does have some benefit. And then also some things you understand, like the reason you feel that is because there's all these other things you're thinking about, but what about? One of the things you guys probably would benefit from is really trying to look more clearly at what are the real differences that are known. And there is a real difference between our perceptions of sort of things being the way they are versus stuff we can actually count on. A lot of the commentary on both sides of this, as an outside observer, not a lot, a decent amount of things are stated that are stated as fact that you cannot count on as fact when you're making these kinds of decisions. You guys don't know where the community is, right? You don't know actually how the partnerships you've talked about wanting to line up would line up in one side or another of this. And so you want to be careful to sort of be clear on these are the things we definitely know and can make decisions on with confidence. And these are the things that we wouldn't know, and we have to be okay with that. And that's inherent to any decision, but you want to be clear about it and be careful, to not mix those up too much, because that can get you in trouble down the road.
Clark, what are you hearing as the things that you feel like are really knowns that you've heard from this group? And what do you feel like are their unknowns? Can you capture those?
From my perspective, the biggest knowns, in terms of a shift are you get some certainty sooner with the property being past a certain point of crossing a line that up to this point has been difficult to cross, which would give you guys potentially some flexibility on how you move forward. That feels like one thing that everybody has said. What that flexibility looks like, whether you lose a lot of flexibility for sure isn't, I think, certain, but that you would get there faster, right? So that much you know. The other thing it sounds like our knowns is you would have to sort of your plan would change. You'd be doing a bunch of work this summer, which might mean that then some of the other work you have to do wouldn't be necessary. Right? I think one of the things it probably portends is like the planning process would also be different. I don't think you'd need to do a lot of the things we talked about because suddenly you'd be in a little bit different environment. So that's known. I think it's easier for me to actually identify the unknowns, the things that we're sort of stating as fact, but we don't, are not fact, but with strong confidence that it's like, I don't know, really, so I think those are the things that I would really make sure you guys look at.
What don't we know?
I think anything in this town right now related to community opinion would be worth sourcing. Like how do we know? I think you guys got into, there was a tremendous amount of confidence going into the last vote that the community was overwhelmingly supportive of the plan. And before the process, when we talked to people in the interviews, before things changed on council, there was tremendous optimism. You guys had just passed 2 ballot initiatives that reinforced the community support for doing this. It was, the money was there. There had been a lot of community engagement, and there was a point in time when things sort of changed and switched quickly. I think especially as sort of some of the details of the new plan, but leading up to that point, it sounded like to most of the people who were involved, this was going forward. Like we've got strong support. And I think it speaks to your point. That's what we heard in the interviews. And the fact that people would say, no, there wasn't, I think reinforces the point I'm making, which is that one person's perspective on where community sits on an issue is not always actual when you sort of then vet with others. So,
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is that was that same ballot, right? I mean, it was the same year when you asked for this, we asked for the 75% to go to Brown Range, right? So if the secondary question would have been the annexation.
It would,
Right, yes.
it would have passed and, probably one of the most comprehensive statements in terms of the debrief was an individual came up who was in very strong opposition. Had you guys gone to vote as opposed to making a decision at council, they would have passed. And that's what turned people off.
I think hindsight, like we don't need to rehash that, but I do think to Clark's point, like one of the biggest unknowns is how does the community feel? We all have our assumptions.
Right.
Put it on the agenda, invite the community to tell us how they feel.
I think after this meeting, which I'm sure is going to be recorded and reviewed, it's going to be in the press tomorrow or the day after.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
and
no.
I actually think that's great. Like, I actually think that the transparency that this group is going through is already a step in a better direction than, not that it was not transparent the first time. I
Oh,
agree.
no, we were not as transparent as we could have been.
Yeah, yeah. And so I already think that, I hope that this is recorded and the paper picks it up and that we're able to say like, hey, we are vetting this. We want to know, like, here are some good things, here are some bad things, like, here's some pros, here's some cons, like, here's where we're at, like, that's what this group should be.
Oh, we can do some communications.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's important. We should control the narrative of like, this is why we're talking about this.
Okay, so I want to go ahead and take another vote at this point to say,
Who's already texting all the attorneys?
is it,
Where do we lay it in now?
is it worthwhile to move this forward to our respective council and boards to vet whether or not we can get agreement on moving something like this forward in a shorter timeline and go for annexation first? Go ahead and give me your fist to 5. All right, glad you're talking to your attorney. Okay.
He's skeptical.
He's an attorney.
That's like what you want in your attorney. Right?
Yeah, that's.
He's like, people who are confident playing the ball.
Is this an emergency?
No,
I need. I gotta take it. Okay, one thing that I just want to give you all kudos to is that this vote in this process did not have clear lines across a given like organizational affiliation, even potential vote on the last vote, right? You all were in the murky space of seeing multiple positives and negatives to each course of action, right? That is a sign that the collaboration is occurring and is different from what happened moving forward. So that's just a piece of the story as you're talking about like what makes this different going forward. This was not clear cut lines in those votes, right? Okay, next thing that I want to just close out on so that you've got advice depending on what happens. So the way that I see this based on the roles you've set up is as project management figures out contractors going forward. What I want to do is a temperature check on this group continuing to work with community builders, Civic Canopy on supporting this work, knowing we've got some if-thens, right? The alternative is looking at opening up an RFP for alternative support. This is awkward to do this with us in the room to some extent, but I want to make sure Emily has guidance going forward. So I'm going to put this out as a proposal. We would like to continue. What?
Do you guys need to figure it out now, I guess?
It's like, if this happens, you all probably want a facilitator.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would say there's no way. And I would put it out.
Take the temperature, yeah.
Right, to go forward with
I
that.
just didn't want you guys to feel like you're in another pressured spot, and so,
With some like,
you know.
If Emily says it's okay, then it's okay.
wow.
This is me.
And labor was.
Just to give guidance, there may be the case that, like we said, we may not be the right fit for just the annexation process. With the exception of maybe you want just a facilitator to help move this group forward for a bit kind of thing. But I want to just get a sense of the group on that, knowing it's input on a contractor decision.
One question, Brett. So if we did put this on the ballot or get ballot language, at what point would we be to not be?
I'd actually give that some thought. I mean, as long as, I mean, they are working to support this governance group right now. I think there is a period of time where that is still the main line to make sure you all prepared to make decisions as the governance group as this is emerging. As long as we're sort of in that space, I still think we're in the clear. Obviously, the second this appears, there's a decision to place it on the ballot. I think that changes things.
Once we make a decision, okay, all right, so to the extent that, you know, we've just, there's gonna be additional work that needs to happen in the next 30 days, right? At least.
Would you guys want to work with us for a shorter period?
Just a thought. I mean, maybe we should just focus on, we've got the city council meeting on the 7th, what, the jam, the second, like, maybe we look at the 8th and 9th and ask you to facilitate that meeting at that point as kind of a follow-up, and then we're gonna have an idea what
Direction
this
you're
is
gonna
gonna chart. So like, instead of like trying to say, hey, here we stand just here on 4th through the summer, let's just,
It's sort of
Right now,
now
look at-
on ramp, off ramp conversation.
Yeah.
Like we will know at that point.
yes, exactly. That'll help decide where we're going. But I think to get through that meeting, we're gonna need the same support we have here, just if you're willing to do that aspect of.
It's in July.
Can I just read what Dan shared?
Would you read your question too?
Yeah, I-
No,
Steering committee is considering the annexation without having a development plan. It would establish some basic parameters, then do a development plan afterwards.
yeah, that's what I wanted to know what the question.
He said if we got a petition on June 30th, first resolution could be July 2nd, second resolution could be August 11th. First reading of the ordinance, August 18th, second reading, August 25th. That's absolute best case. Assumes no problems with annexation agreement, mistakes with notices, et cetera, problems with planning commission. That council wants a special meeting on August 25th. So basically, we need a resolution. By the 30th of June.
Yeah, I can see that.
June.
Yeah, so we'd have to have a special board meeting to
Yeah.
send a petition.
And you would have to move forward with that without having a conversation with city council prior to just showing up with the resolution on the seventh.
Why not? So it'd be a surprise.
Well, we would obviously communicate it out.
Yeah.
But that would force that conversation on the.
Based on this information, Tom, what are you proposing?
That I resign.
But work for community. That'd be great.
Yeah, well, that would be fun. Like I said, it's gonna be highly disruptive and we're gonna have to refile.
Would you still be at a 3 or above based on this information, or does this reduce you down to a 2?
Well, I mean, I'd probably still be at a 3. We would have to approach council and say, your expectations for all these other things are gonna shift. They have to.
Part of that too is, if I can speak for the role you play, like your job is often to be like, if this is the direction I get from my council, we will work it out. So it's almost like, for you to have 2 would be hard.
Right.
Because you serve the council.
The 5 and I'm a 3.
And so I can appreciate that's hard for you to shift off of. All you can do is sort of share the information.
I'm gonna just share it. It's gonna, like I said, it will be a mad scramble.
In that petition, we'll define the terms, is that like the limits, the boundaries, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine we're gonna have to create a plat. You're gonna have to create a property line, a new property line that defines the boundaries of what we're annexing, because it has to be a legal description of what we're annexing. So, we create a legal description between now and the 30th of June.
What do you think?
Would that also need to have the annexation parameters that we were talking about earlier, trying to create a bubble to capture that idea of like, what are the kind of parameters we're working within these level word constraints, parameters, because it's. Would that have to include that as well?
It would mean
Or is that more plain?
it would mean that YVHA would be defining the parameters of the annexation unless we scheduled an additional steering committee meeting prior to the petition.
Does that feel?
I mean, we could do that. Obviously.
It feels close to impossible.
Close to impossible?
It feels like it's gonna be everything has to go perfectly. But
Do you want to move towards
try.
thinking through the spring date?
I think that it's up to the city and YVHA to really, figure out. I think we can make it work from a YVHA board perspective, like just wearing that hat of like, yeah, we can schedule a special meeting. Like but I don't know staff capacity, like that's not my job. And so I'm really relying on Emily as a staff person in the room to say like, yes, we can get the plat done, or we can at least try to do this. And then, obviously we've heard Tom's perspective. Yeah, I think it is gonna be a challenge, but I think my opinion hasn't changed. I'll be like, oh, it's the community to try and work this out. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Is there a possibility the city can call an executive session meeting? No,
Doing an executive session.
or just a special meeting, even
You can do a special meeting.
in the next couple of weeks, or. I mean, it's a number one council goal. The lines of. I think President McKean would have full support.
I'm curious if this information changes anyone's ability to support consensus on that decision. What are you thinking, Emily?
I mean, I agree with Tom. It feels next to impossible and this might just be like a unnecessary distraction that upsets people, but I will stay at 3 and do what I can to explore what's possible. Chat with, Elliot, is our acting ED, to see like what he says also, and our board president, and we'll figure it out.
It'd probably be, based on Tom's comment, critical to see if there's a legal description for neighborhood A from the previous work, because that's, I mean, just getting a surveyor out there to line it out, the time frame. But if there's an existing legal description, certainly that changes your time
We
frame.
do have legal description.
It depends.
I'll have to dig into the file. for-
Yeah, I think it's for the sites.
Don't take a picture now.
Yep.
I'll look at it.
I was gonna say, this is the picture when they went. Everything went.
This is consensus.
Today. I mean, right, if we really want to set this course correctly, right?
I would have thought Lorraine had already.
Oh, I'm literally typing it now. And every time something happens, I like delete. So
Again, right, I don't know when this gets posted.
As well. so you guys
We're
have
watching,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that quick and then we'll come to a close on this meeting. So I want to know, give me your fist of 5 on continuing to work with community builders, Civic Canopy. The alternative being opening up an RFP to support you. Go ahead and give me your fist of 5 on 1, 2, 3. Okay, all right, so, that gives you guidance as a project manager.
That was consensus for continuing to work with y'all.
It was consensus. Everybody was a 3 or above. Okay. Last piece, you would now have an evaluation survey in your mailbox. This is helpful for being able to report back to Belonging Colorado that funded this work. So go ahead and take about 10 minutes to complete that at some point over the next, but let's just, over the next week.
Oh.
Okay.
There's it now.
Not the biggest urgency out of all the things we just talked about. This is your last gift to Brad before he heads out to Minneapolis, is to get that evaluation so that we can have that for the report for Belonging Colorado. Okay. All right. And then I'll just connect with you all next to figure out the next steps on amongst all this schedule, where we're going from here.
I would love to be clear in terms of, as we're leaving this room, what is our message, right? And, I would think we want to get we're gonna get an email out to council immediately, right? Because this is, there's, so we can have a statement, because I'm sure Julia will be calling one of us within the, not today, tomorrow. Yes, exactly. So.
From my perspective, the message is pretty straightforward. We have a constraints analysis. We know the number of units we can build without impacting the city's ability to provide services.
And without like raising additional tax, like without
Without-
additional burden.
Exactly, and we know the boundaries in terms of what we would like to have. The only question I have is the commercial interests that we've been talking about would not be in sites in a site.
We didn't talk about that.
Okay,
So I think, from my perspective, the message would be, we've established a roadmap forward.
Right.
We are checking in with the city council and WHA on the potential of accelerating the annexation timeframe to this year. We'll see how that works with all the partners involved.
You could lean into this
Well,
extremely simplified version of it and the other one, which is like, in one alternative for moving forward, we advance the work on moving towards annexation so that that's solidified. And in another, we focus the planning work first and then put that forward as a part of the annexation approval. I mean, those are sort of the fundamental differences that people could understand. I'm not saying you use this. I'm simply saying, like, in one case, we're looking at the benefits, the pros and cons of an accelerated approach to annexation.
Just to be clear, though, we are talking about delineating 18 or 20 acres of commercial space.
I don't think we define the acreage. I think we just say it's gonna include a mix of uses, including non-residential.
Yeah, I think we just keep it open and broad because then we're getting too
But
specific.
we're still gonna define the area where that's gonna be down by the road, right?
Not as part of this, not as part of the NC.
Then I think that's a hard one to get past, because that's the only natural place to put commercial.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but we don't have time to start laying out
Okay.
where things are gonna go.
That's the difference right now is in one case, you're doing some planning and in the other case, you're not, and you're gonna get the annexation and then plan.
Well, and also what's qualified to annex, eligible for annexation with the year continuity. So it's not like we could annex two pieces on other sides of the project.
Right.
Yeah, no, it would all be adjacent to the city limits.
Yes.
We'd have to.
That's cool.
Yeah, but I think to your point, like, we don't have time to dig into those, like, where we're gonna lay stuff out right now, but that's why this group will be important, and like Jay said, like, as we present development plans to the community, they will have a chance to weigh in and say yes or no on those development plans, so that if the commercial is not where you think it should be, then that's your opportunity, so it's just like swapping the order we do it in,
Okay.
but not laying it out up front.
And to be clear also, we don't even have to define the zoning. I think legally, statutorily, we have 6 months or something like that to define actual zone. So we can annex it and it would have no zoning.
Perfect. Which is easier in a sense, unless you created just extremely flexible zoning, which might frustrate people actually.
Yeah. We might
Because
have-
then you can do the development plan and a code for it all in one swoop.
And
Which you can do
that
the
has to be.
Cognizant of time, because I know Emily. has
Yeah.
a lot of questions she wanted to get.
Sharon, so-
Yeah.
Let's turn the emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I kept but I think this calls for the need to get into scheduling for another SCSC meeting pretty quick here to also get you into these questions.
Yes.
We can do a single day, 3 hour. Or
I mean, I guess a question for you guys to consider too is this going to be a logistical enough meeting that you guys want to
To
do
virtual.
virtual? Which just I mean, would be easier for our schedules, but.
And virtual would be fine for a meeting like this, and. Later in the afternoon would be better for me.
And we can always do where you all are in the room together too, and we're virtual. if that is-
To make it, it's just, it's depending, like, you know, I'll be out for the first day of pocket until like July. Something like that. When somebody said July 9th at the meeting, well, we don't.
All right,
Yeah.
gonna go ahead and close out the meeting for folks who are online. See you all later.